Proceed with our Business Operations Committee, and I'll turn to the chair of that committee, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. On behalf of our Todd Chastain and myself, we represent the BizOp Committee on behalf of the board and appreciate the opportunity to spend some time on a few items today. I'm going to go slightly out of order with the chair's permission.
Certainly.
Thank you. And talk about the agency vacancy report first. And really, I have not heard any comments about the report. What we agreed in talking with staff is it's difficult to do the report based on the timing of our meeting for the end of the previous month. That often doesn't leave much time. For example, next month our meeting starts on April 1st. And it also puts a lot of pressure on staff when there's a lot of other things doing to get it done. So talking through those issues, we've agreed that from now on, the agency vacancy report will be done as of, in this instance, February 15th of the previous month. That way it can be completed in plenty of time, and we'll just start to have it now on the basis of the 15th of every month, which I think will be much easier for everyone. In addition to that, I'd like to have Catherine Johnston come forward to make an introduction for us to somebody who we're very glad to have with us and who will help us with this aforesaid agency vacancy report.
Thank you. Yes, we are delighted. I'm particularly delighted. We have filled the HR director position, and I would like to introduce to you Ron Paxton, our new director of human resources. Just by way of introduction, Ron is a seasoned human resource leader with over 30 years of professional HR experience, coupled with his master's degree in human resource management from Texas A&M University. And his 30 years of HR experience spans multiple industries and organizations, including higher education, manufacturing, cooperative organizations, Fortune 500 companies, and startup organizations. He has also held leadership positions in human resources for over 25 years, with responsibility in the HR functions including employee relations, labor relations, training and development, compliance, employee engagement, compensation and benefits, recruitment, and succession plannings. We are so fortunate to have Ron here joining us at DPI. Please welcome him. Thank you.
Ron, welcome. We're very glad to have you with us and very much appreciate the work you'll be doing and look forward to working with you. So thank you very much. All right, now back to our previously scheduled programming. BizOp 1, which is our first of our action on first reading items, is approval of contracts over $1 million. We have an agreement between State Education Agency and the Department of Information Technology this time. This proposed agreement will provide, among other things, broadband, internet, firewall, and content filtering to K through 12 public schools. It extends an existing agreement with DIT for another year for approximately $20 million. It is related to the School Connectivity Initiative and continues successful work that has been ongoing under another existing agreement with DIT. Mike Ramsey is here if there are any questions that any board members have about this proposed contract, so let me open the floor if there are any questions. All right, very good. Not seeing any. This will be, again, an action item tomorrow on first reading. We have a second contract that does not require board approval, but I just wanted to mention it very briefly, which is it's an NCDPI Microsoft reseller agreement with SoftChoice. And this is what would be characterized truly as a convenience contract. DPI, like state public schools on whose behalf it is negotiating, can use a convenience cost pricing in these instances. This particular contract will be used to purchase licenses in Microsoft Academy for CTE purposes primarily, and among other things. Locking in the convenience pricing for another year does not implicate the contract rule, though future purchases in excess of the dollar threshold in the contract would. So we mention it as an important ongoing contract for the work that's being done, particularly in the CTE area, as support for what we just heard some reports about. All right, BizOp 2 is our other action on first reading item, which is Digital Teaching and Learning Initiative Grant. Emma Bratton will be presenting this item, which asks the State Board to issue RFPs for first Digital Learning Initiative grants for 2020 through 2021, and second Digital Learning Initiative implementation grants for 2020 through 2021 and 2021 through 2022. This is the extension of the state's digital learning plan, which in part is contemplated by the General Assembly, of course. Emma, welcome, and look forward to your report.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Glad to be here today to present to you the next round of requests for proposals for school districts and charter schools. For those of you who remember or who were on the board in 2018, we awarded over $2.1 million to planning grants, to implementation grants, and to Innovation Academy grants. So this year, 2 of those grant types are still in process. Our implementation, which will wrap up this year, and our Innovation Academies will roll into next year. But we are proud of the work that's taking place across the state to support districts as they address challenges, harness opportunities, and leverage resources for digital age teaching and learning. In the past 3 years, Digital Teaching and Learning has committed over $5.2 million towards these efforts. And these grantees have been really good stewards of these funds as they lead to plan, to implement, and to support educators across the state. You'll note in that column on the far right-hand side that last year, less than 1% of the funds were reverted on June 30th of 2019. So we're proud of them for their commitment and responsibility for having maximum impact in their schools and districts. With this new round of grants, you'll see on the bottom row for 2020 and 2021, based upon available funding, the DLI would plan to commit an additional $1.2 million towards those planning grants and towards those implementation grants. Based on the high demand we've seen with this work, we're presenting the planning grant RFP for the next school year that is intended to target those at the beginning stages of development. Those districts and charter schools will use the funds to conduct a type of needs assessment by completing that digital learning progress rubric to align their efforts with the state's working definition of personalized learning and to ultimately produce, we hope, a high-quality implementation plan. So traditional school districts can apply for funding up to $50,000 and charter schools up to $15,000 for this next school year. Based upon this funding of $400,000 for planning grants, we would hope to fund up to 10 of these types. The second type then presented today for implementation grants would provide an opportunity for these public school units to put into action a high-quality plan they've developed for personalized learning. So this would be a 2-year grant beginning with this school year and running through the following school year based upon available funding. Each school district could apply for up to $75,000 for each year, a total of $150,000 for the 2 years, and charter schools up to $25,000 each year for a total of $50,000. So based upon our funding for the implementation grants, we would hope to fund up to 12 of these grant types. This work has evolved since we first launched this program in 2017. It's been important for us to further define some of the DLI priorities that are identified in this RFP. So in previous years, we asked those school districts and charter schools to focus on the DLCs, and you'll see that those types of things are still identified here as part of the RFP process. But we've added the digital learning standards for students, which was adopted by our state board last year and will go into place this coming year. So it's been a natural progression as we think about how those digital learning competencies the educators put into action will then help the students implement and use those digital learning standards as well. Then also since 2017, our theory of action outlined in ESSA provides us with that working definition for personalized learning. So the districts and the charter schools will have a clear guideline for what this student-centered approach should entail. So we'll have, as you look here on the screen, the working definition of the 4 pillars as we understand them, the learner profile where each student better knows their strengths and weaknesses, their preferences and interests in order to set their academic and personal goals with the teacher. So that's on the left-hand side, that learner profile pillar. With this information then, the individualized learning path provides the student with the choice as their teacher uses a variety of instructional practices, strategies and materials to help make the learning more accessible for the students. And then as they progress at their own pace to meet those goals, the learning is monitored based on what they know and what they're able to do. And that's that third pillar for competency-based progression. It means that the students are mastering topics through a variety of assessment types, and it takes place in this flexible learning environment where students have access to the staff, to the space, to the time, and the resources that best suit their needs. So this learning environment we know is ambitious, it's challenging, but worth it to ensure that each student has more equitable access to learning that meets his or her needs. So the RFP that we're proposing here today would be an opportunity for districts and charter schools to tap into the DLI grant resources, and it would be important for them to continue to build that connectivity and network that these grantees would have in this type of program. Our application deadline for each of these grants would be April 27th of this year, and we would follow the state board policy for competitive grants. Our final decisions for selecting these and making recommendations to the board would be based on geography, the DPI priorities, socioeconomic needs, available funding, and then the applicant's prior performance as well. Would like to bring these back to the board, then our plan would be in the June state board meeting to facilitate the timeline for awarding these for the fall of 2020. Thank you, and we would ask for action on first read with these RFPs.
Yes, any questions or comments? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, good time to hear that report after the presentation we had this morning, so very good timing. BizOp 3 is the continued work. It was a matter for action on supervision and administration of state and federal education funds to support North Carolina's general and uniform system of free public schools. We continue to receive feedback on this proposed rule, and so continue therefore to work on the rule. And so for that reason, we're going to remove this item this month and come back next month after further revisions are made and further consultation with staff is undertaken with respect to any further revisions as well. So that item is on hold for this month, and appreciate the input that we continue to receive. BizOp 4 is a matter for discussion where we have not heard any further input, so it's a matter of, I said discussion, I meant action. We have discussed it previously. It's the proposed amendment to the contract procedures. And unless there's any further questions or comments on that, then we would be moving forward with that as a action item during tomorrow's meeting. All right, BizOp 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Let me just make a brief comment overviewing these, if I could. You'll notice on all of these items, we needed to get an extension till April 15th from a March 15th deadline for the reports. And the reason uniformly on these was we don't get the data needed to properly prepare the report until a time such that we can't have it in time to have a discussion of it, as is the board policy and rule. Have a discussion, work on the report during the month if there's any comments, and then finalize the report in the next month. They need to be a month back in terms of scheduling. So we've asked for the month for a waiver this time, but what we need to do, and I think the board has talked about this at other times, and not just in the area of BizOp committee, but we need to try to align our reporting dates, that is when we do the report, with when we're going to receive the data that makes the report full and worthwhile. It just, we want to have to get those things in proper alignment. So I would suggest as an item that's for our legislature that's not involving any expense and actually is much more efficient for everybody, if perhaps we can work through make some efforts to work through negotiating some dates that align with when we receive the data to be able to do the reports. That'd be helpful to staff. I think will be helpful to the board. So that's just an overview statement. I know it applies to some other areas as well from some other committees. I know sometimes this also occurs. So with that said, we'll proceed to hear reports on these items. BizOp 5 is a discussion item then that involves report to the General Assembly about advanced placement, international baccalaureate, and Cambridge International teacher bonuses. Isaac Lake is here to report on this. And again, these will, in some instances, not be with full data, so this will give us a sense of what the report will look like when we get fuller report next month. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan, members of the board, good afternoon. This is the Advanced Placement International Baccalaureate Cambridge International Education Teacher Bonus Program report, and you have this report in your e-board. This represents a simple accounting of funds allocated to each LEA for qualifying scores on AP, IB, and Cambridge education exams. The total allocation this year was $4,112,900. And it's $50 per exam. The maximum amount for any teacher is $3,500. The qualifying scores for AP are a 3, 4, or 5. For IB, 4 through 7, and for the AICE Cambridge exams, an A, a B, or a C. Happy to entertain any questions. We don't, in fact, by this date, have the allocation from LEAs. That has not been reported.
And I think one question that's always out there is, have the teachers received the bonuses yet? And if not, when are they due?
So that those bonuses are being dispersed. And at the time of this report, final expenditures for the January 2020 allocation by LEAs and charter schools are not available, as disbursements have not been reconciled yet.
And that can be added to the report as we get that information before our next meeting.
That is correct.
All right, I think that'll be important to have as part of the report as we work to finalize it. Other questions or, yes?
Just a general question. I'm aware that the bonus structure exists, and this is less about your report and more to ask just some general information. Is the sense that providing the teacher bonuses for the AP, IB, and Cambridge folks, is the sense that the bonus structure incentivizes greater participation in the IB program, or that there is a increased recruitment for that program? Did I hear you say $4 million?
Yes, sir.
Devoted to that significant amount of funds, and I wondered what the overall goal is of that bonus program. I certainly understand how the bonus program fits into other parts of our K-12 system, literacy and whatnot, but I'm not crystal clear on the goal of that bonus program, which has a $4 million price tag. I guess that's a general question for anyone.
So one stated goal was to impact teacher retention, and we have not been able to determine a causal relationship between the bonus program and teacher transitions or retention.
Are there any other goals of a $4 million program to provide bonuses to AP teachers? I can share with you that having taught English for 16 years at the high school level, if you want to retain teachers, allow them to teach AP classes. My wife was an AP teacher, I was a pre-AP teacher, and that is la creme de la creme in terms of academic rigor and challenges you intellectually in a way as a teacher that teaching remedial classes does not. Remedial classes challenge you in a pedagogical way, but and I think it might be worth in this setting to kind of consider the impact of that $4 million investment, and if we're getting that, and if we could perhaps consider, well, let me just stop there, yeah.
Well, I think we can consider this setting, Mr. Buxton.
I just want to say, I remember when Florida did this partnership with AP years ago, and I think their goal was not just more kids in AP, more kids taking the exam, and an incentive for teachers to get them to take the exam and pass the exam, get them some college credit, et cetera. I don't know that I've seen any data from Florida, North Carolina, or anywhere that those goals, and I just haven't seen the Florida data, so I'm not suggesting it's not there, but I don't see any in North Carolina that suggests that we're getting that return. And in fact, we've had some participation and achievement numbers last month that suggested maybe we're not. So I think this is an important observation you've made about where $4 million is being invested that we may otherwise think could be reallocated.
Part of me wonders, Mr. Buxton, and again, you know, sitting in this role, I certainly don't understand every aspect of allocations, but Ms. White made a comment earlier when we were thinking about summer reading camps and about the necessity for us to have funds to make sure that every child that is not reading at proficiency has the opportunity to attend summer reading camps. And when I think about the trickle-up benefit of investing in that K-3 space versus the potential impact of providing bonuses for the AP space, which is at the end of the K-12 curriculum spectrum, we might actually get significant bang for our buck and maybe even have more equitable allocation of resources if we used $4 million for teacher bonuses for AP and IB to actually provide more funds for summer reading camps or for other areas of dire need.
Yeah,
Just
let-
a thought.
Well, let me suggest, I think that would more properly come under, the BizOp committee is reporting out what's being paid pursuant to policy. I think that would more appropriately come back to us through consideration of Mr. Buxton's committee, I suspect, would be the proper.
Yeah, I mean, it's state
committee.
law, so.
Yeah, most we can then do is discuss it and make recommendations from the state law, but we're not in a position to
Agreed.
change that, but we are in a position to have a discussion about whether or not the law is accomplishing what we wanted to accomplish, which I think is your point.
Yes, sir, it is. And apologies to you, Mr. Lake, for
Not at
asking
all.
this question while
Not
you're
at
at the
all.
microphone.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, any other thank you for those comments and questions. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
All right, our next item then is BizOp 6, which is a report to the North Carolina General Assembly on 4th and 5th grade reading teacher bonuses. And Dr. Tomberlin is here to report on this with the data that you have.
So the fourth and fifth, so BizOp 6 and 7 have the same issue, and that is a timing issue in getting the verification back on who actually got paid, because the report seeks to understand which teachers qualified for the bonus and were ultimately paid, and did that have an impact on teacher retention and teacher effectiveness in those targeted grades and subjects. I did get a text while I was sitting here from my folks downstairs that they are reviewing the reports before we officially release them. So we have the data. You have a boilerplate report that tells you the kinds of analyses we will be doing and reporting to you on, though you don't have those numbers in them. I think we could possibly get you this report. We definitely will meet the legislative deadline. It's a question of how much the board wants to see in this and have a chance to discuss the findings in it before sending it over to the General Assembly.
Ultimately, it's a board report under the statute, so I think we do need to see it as quickly as your office can finish it, and then we'll obviously vote it as a matter of action item at our next meeting and try to move it forward as quickly as we can. The extension has apparently been in place through April 15th at this point, but this is another one of the subject areas where if we can align your receipt of the data to the timing of the report, I think it'll be
Certainly.
beneficial across the board.
That would be most appreciated, because the situation we're in right now, we've had the data less than 2 weeks.
Right.
And that is a very, very short time. I am very concerned that there may be errors in the data. We may be might have missed something that we normally would not have missed if we had kind of time to do our due diligence around the report.
And I think the board is in full agreement that not having errors on this kind of data is extremely important, so we appreciate the care that staff is taking in that regard. And we understand that it cannot be done overnight. It's not that facile, unfortunately. So, again, I think this reemphasizes our need to align the timing of the reports with when the data is available for you to be able to work with. So as soon as you can get out a report, even if it's before our next meeting, that way people can study it and be in a position to have any questions, if there are any, to you even before the meeting, so.
So just so I'm clear, we'll deliver the report to the board office, and the dissemination to board members is
From
at the
Dr.
discretion of the
Townsend
board
Smith,
office.
yes.
And the board office will also send it over to the General Assembly at the appropriate time.
After the board has approved it at our next meeting, yes.
Just want to make sure what my responsibilities in this process are.
I think we have everything down but the timing of data and being able to, you have adequate time and your staff to get the report done, so.
Appreciate that.
This month brings home how much we need to work on that, at least from our committee standpoint. So, thank you, Dr. Tomlin.
Sure.
All right, so that covered items Biz Op 6 and 7, which brings us to Biz Op 8, which is a report to the North Carolina General Assembly on Career and Technical Education Bonus Report. And we have Kimberly McDonald here to report, who we've already been able to acknowledge her good work today on the report we've already seen in the CTE area. So thank you for being here for this report.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chairman Dunkman, Chairman Davis, Superintendent Johnson, and school board members for having us. This report for the General Assembly calls for a study on the impact of CTE credential program on teacher retention and recruitment. Just to brief you all on our program, in October, we shared with you all that we work with our partners in commerce to establish tiering based on both academic rigor and industry value. We have 3 different tiers: Tier 0, Tier 1, and Tier 2. This study provides an overview of the credential bonus expenditures by LEA, and furthermore provides the program study feedback, which is an impact analysis on the teachers. So if you look at slide 2, there's a really long report, but here is a summary of what's being presented to the General Assembly. We expended $1,867,921 to 2,639 teachers that had students who earned credentials on the credential tier bonus list. That number is actually up in our teachers awarded this from last year, which was 2,527 teachers that were awarded. The total amount of the total amount that could be earned was $1,955,950,000, which you'll see at the total of the bottom of table 2. But when we applied the maximum, which is called out by the legislation of $3,500 per teacher, a maximum credential bonus, we wound up with a little bit less, $100,000 less. What you'll see in those numbers, you'll see the number of our credentials earned from Tier 2 as well as Tier 3. Tier 2 being paid out at a rate of $25 per credential, and Tier 3 at a rate of $50 per credential. Our average teacher bonus this year was $72.19. We had 90 teachers qualify for that $3,500 maximum per student. Now, we took a little bit of a different take, and we tried to take a look at the impact on our teacher retention. So we took a study based on the teachers who were awarded the credential bonus from last year, which is 2017-18. And in that group, we had only 426 teachers respond out of the 2,527 teachers from last year that received a bonus. That's 16% respondent rate. But those teachers told us and shared us some insightful information about the impact. So we had 104, or 24%, say that the credential bonus influenced their decision to remain in the teaching profession. A lot of our CTE teachers are really there for our students, and some of the quotes that I had from those teachers was that they would continue to teach without a credential payment, but they're thrilled to have it as it recognizes their commitment and hard work that they pour into their students each semester. Others shared that their goal was to get students interested in careers and also in the manufacturing industry, which is where that teacher taught. Another interesting theme that I saw is that teachers recognized in their quotes and their qualitative data that this was a supplement to their salary loss. A lot of our teachers are subject matter experts coming out of the field to come and teach our students. And so we saw that that was a supplement to what they would normally make in business and industry. And I saw that quote numerous times. Then we moved on to the number of respondents saying that the CTE credential bonus influenced their decision to expand or change their course offerings and courses that were taught. And we saw that 69 out of the 426, or 16%, shared that that was a part of their influence. Quotes shared from there was, payments help. However, I also want to teach the classes that help students to be better prepared to earn credentials for themselves. And another quote was that they continue to find and grow my program area. My focus is my students and how I can offer greater opportunities to them. So very dedicated CTE teachers. The last was just a yes or no question that we asked them. And so 54 respondents out of the 426 said that they were made aware of the teacher credential payment when they entered into the teaching profession as a recruitment tool. So only 13% actually were made aware of that prior to entering the field. So we're hoping that we can provide additional data as we look at providing feedback, survey feedback from the 2018-19 teachers who received payment. But for our report, this purpose for this year, what we did was we were able to pull from the teachers who were awarded the bonus in 2017-18.
First of all, thank you for the work that you've done to turn around the data into a reportable form as quickly as you have, so we appreciate that very much. A second observation, and I say this, and this truly is an observation right now, Dr. Michael indicated earlier a review is going to be undertaken for all the credentialing areas to try to have it applicable. And I would point out in Table 3 in this report, under Microsoft PowerPoint and Microsoft Word, this board had commented at an earlier time when it had come before us as to whether or not those were things that were more expected at this point as opposed to viewed as a credential in the business world, I think were the general gist of the questions. And you might note that approximately half of the bonus money went on these two areas of all the certification areas. About half of that 1.8 million went on those two areas. So I say that not for anything further than this report's helpful, and we do look forward to getting the additional report so the board can continue to study as a whole the credentialing work with you and the work that you're doing, which is, as has already been said, very important. With that further comment, which I appreciate your indulging me, any other questions or comments on this report?
I have a question, Mr.
Yes,
President.
please.
This is more of a data question. So one of your data points was that 24% of your respondents indicated that the bonus pay was important to them remaining in the profession. And another way of looking at that is that 76% of them said that the bonus structure was not important for them remaining in the profession. So I wanted to ask, is it your sense that increased pay in general, that the actually elevating teacher pay for all teachers, but including the CTE teachers, would get us the same kind of result, or is it that it's the bonus structure? Is it the bonus structure that I've done a good job and therefore I'm receiving bonus pay? Is it that kind of validation that impacts their desire to stay in the teaching profession, or is it just the total salary that they're making, including the bonus, that's what's in?
Yeah, and it's a great question, but what was asked here with the percentages was really surrounded and asked around the credential bonus payment. So I can't really conjecture without having data to support, but I would say that certainly, this one was about the credential bonus program as a whole, and how it impacted them.
Yeah, thank you. Just curious. I wonder how many North Carolina teachers would say that a bonus structure would also impact their desire to stay in the profession, just in general.
Interesting.
Mr. Buxton.
Mr. Doug, I know we have one more of these. I'm just wondering if, rather than having the department be a research and evaluation shop for this General Assembly every year on these questions and kind of asking the same question again and again, General Assembly has a program evaluation division. These are their programs that we're implementing. And I think these questions about the bonuses would be a good one for their program evaluation division to look at. Might be something, we can't ask them to do that, the General Assembly has to, but we got all the data we can give them. And to do an independent assessment of how they think the bonus program is playing out. I think we don't have a lot of research capacity to be generating annual studies, it seems to me, and we'd be better served by working with our partners. So I'm just suggesting this might be a short session request of them to think about with program evaluation.
Let me turn to the superintendent and ask if you have some thoughts about whether that might be a workable thing to do in light of the amount of time staff is obviously spending on these items.
I think we can absolutely make that ask. I would imagine the General Assembly would also point out that they have a limited bandwidth, but then we can actually compare bandwidths and see where we can.
We'll have that fight.
Thank you. Ms. McDonald, thank you very much. All right, this now brings us to Biz Op number 9, which is the report to the General Assembly on third grade reading bonuses. Dr. Galloway.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Meet you again. So it's very similar to Tom's report, or Dr. Tom Berlin's report with the other teacher bonuses. You have a boilerplate report in front of you, and the data will be inserted as soon as we have the data available.
Dr. Tomlin indicated there was some timing where it's getting close, perhaps, that they might be able to get it. What about your department? Is that, or your report, is it the same or is it different?
So, just to clarify, we supply the data and the analysis for this report, so I'm not trying to encroach on Dr. Galloway's area here, but
So the same would apply as the other two reports?
so in this case, it's not the same.
not the
Because
same,
as you
good.
know, the third grade reading, we found in January, we found an error in the data, and we had to rerun the third grade reading model for the entire state. So those bonuses were paid in, are to be paid in February. And we would imagine that getting the data back on who actually received payment, who was eligible to be paid, would come around the same time frame, which would put us somewhere in the third week of March. And then we would need to drop that data into this boilerplate and conduct those analyses. So we were looking at the same time frame, but just a month later than these other ones.
So that begs the question, I guess, from our timing standpoint, our next meeting is April 1st and 2nd. Is there going to be a time frame sufficient for y'all to be able to do the report by April 1st and 2nd, or is it going to go past that time before you're going to have the data you need to put it into a report form? And I'm asking for a reasonable response, not a, whatever the reasonable time frame is what I'm trying to ask.
So I would say, if I had to guess, that if everything occurs in the way that it's occurred for the 4th and 5th reading and the 4th through 8th math, the payroll data coming through on a similar time frame, I would say we might have a little better chance of hitting it where we can put it in front of you in session in April, because this is only one report as opposed to the two we're putting together now. But I do think, if I recall correctly, the third grade reading report has some additional kind of analytic requirements that the 4th and 5th and the 4th through 8th math do not have. I mean, it's very connected to the Read to Achieve initiative, and I think we have, in the past, we've tried to do a little more in-depth analyses on this with regard to the retention of teachers in third grade reading and their effectiveness. So
it might be tight. Unreasonably tight is what I'm hearing.
I would prefer to be optimistic and think that we could get something to you. I think we can certainly let the board staff know if things are not looking good in enough time for us to respond.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on this? Comments? All right, thank you. I do want to say, and I know, first and foremost, on behalf of the staff, I know the staff cares about these deadlines, and the board obviously cares deeply about meeting the deadlines that are set. And so, it's difficult to ask for waivers on time, but on the other hand, if the timing of the data does not align with the timing of the report, I think it is very important that we have a conversation to try to work through what those dates are collectively. And so, I appreciate the guidance we're getting on timing, and that's the reason for those questions. And I do think we should work through our legislative liaison to see what progress can be made on better aligning these report dates with the time when the data for the reports is going to become available.
I just have a quick question, Mr. Duncan. So does it, adjust my mic. So is there, I know this is a naive question, but is it possible, I don't know what drives the General Assembly dates for these periodic reports. So, I mean, how much flexibility is there for the General Assembly to work with us on adjusting the timelines for the JLEOC reports, for instance?
I do not profess expertise in that area.
Is that cemented in stone somewhere? I guess that's,
Well, there's deadlines and statutes, and we like to meet deadlines.
so there's statutory requirements. Okay, well,
I think we're all A students who wanted to try to meet deadlines on staff.
I like that.
And here, but then at the same time, you also want to prepare a report that's got the information you need. So I think we need to have that conversation, I think. Today's just a good illustration of why it's important.
Definitely.
All right, we've got executed contracts report, and I have not heard any questions from any board members on that report this month.
I have questions.
Certainly.
So this is an issue about a previously executed contract, but potentially one in the future that needs to be fixed. This is, if y'all, just earlier this morning in last meeting, there was a report done by the Southern Regional Education Board. 2 weeks ago, DPI finance team received a requisition to pay a substantial amount of money to SREB for that work. However, the DPI finance team had no indication of a contract for that work. So in looking for that contract, we were delivered the contract between the Southern Regional Education Board and the North Carolina State Board of Education, which was actually executed November 4th of 2019, but never reported through the state board policies. And going through this, we have some concerns that it violates a number of laws and policies that would actually make it ineffective. And I've shared this concern, and I know that there's a fix in work, but I'm hoping we can get an update on what that fix is. So just for the background, if you're over a certain amount of money for a state contract, you need to have a competitive bid for that process. We cannot find any evidence that a competitive bid was done for this work. We also don't find any evidence that the state board voted to execute this contract. And it also violates policies by which contracts are supposed to be signed by the CFO to make sure we have enough funding for the contract and where the source of funds will come from, and the superintendent to make sure it goes through all these legal parameters. And I'm hoping for an update on what the fix will be for the work that's already done when, according to all the information we have now, this is an illegal, ineffective contract.
So I can address part of that, Superintendent, and I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. You're correct. There are some matters dealing with that contract that need to be corrected. One of the first steps was to contact the vendor and explain to them that the limitation on the fee and get the fee back into the right amount so that it doesn't trip some of those stipulations. There's other corrections that are in progress of being made, and those will be addressed and then brought back through the appropriate process to the board for our next meeting. So, Mr. Snyder, is there anything else you would add to that?
Oh, thank you, Chair Davis.
certainly our friends over at the Department of Administration and their legal office have been made aware about this contract, which is effectively void from the start because it didn't follow valid policies. So they've been contacted after the agency brought this contract to our attention. I've spoken with their counsel. I've spoken with their counsel at the Attorney General's office, and we're moving forward. Certainly, as the chair indicated, the vendor's been brought into the conversation as well. Certainly, the board's policies and our procurement laws are on the books. It's important that we follow them. When we deviate from those processes, we run into trouble. I know we've had that issue in a couple places. I mean, you will recall the emergency Read to Achieve contract that was canceled at DIT earlier this month. Again, all this just counsels for us to move through our processes in the appropriate way to make sure that we're indeed dotting every I and crossing every T.
So what happened here? Who was involved in this contract? It was signed by Eric Davis.
Yeah, I'm responsible for this, and so I take full responsibility for
So why-
not following the process, and that's why we're going back
Okay.
and correcting it.
Why was the state board not made aware of this contract?
Well, I'll just say it's my responsibility, and I own up to it.
And so now the fix is going to be, even though you already didn't negotiate, there was no competitive bid, but the price that was first charged for the work is now, after the work's been done, going to be lowered to get under the threshold. So we're admitting that we were using taxpayer dollars and without a competitive bid, overpaying someone to do the work.
The fix is in the works. This is initially anticipated to be around a $31,000 contract. Delegation of authority to agencies is $25,000. Clearly, there's no dispute here that we have a void contract, and we have a vendor who, ends up holding the bag if it's on notice as well if those issues are not, if those formalities are not followed. So in any event, the process is moving forward to get this fixed.
Okay, and I just know that from previous meetings, Mr. Duncan, you say it's very important for the state board to be good shepherds of the taxpayer dollars. But again, through whatever process was done, there was an agreement to make a payment for, something that really caught my eye, that should have caught someone's eye reviewing this contract, was paying SREB $3,600 to come present to the state board on their findings. Then $2,800 for indirect costs. Do you know what those indirect costs were?
Again, the fix is going to be taken care of with respect to these. Now, one can talk about the process issues, which I think all agree need to be resolved. With respect to the actual line items of this contract, we have line items in all different kinds of contracts for deliverables. Now, with respect to this agreement with SREB, of course, North Carolina has been a member of this compact for some time. It has unique capability to come in and do this work as we've seen. Of course, SREB's work was very much here in public, at board meetings in February, mentioned in January as well as December. So it's not as though this was somehow done somewhere other than here in this boardroom.
Right,
But
we just didn't
nevertheless, the
know.
formalities need to
We
be
just didn't
fixed.
know there was a contract and they were going to get paid until the state board told us to pay them for this contract.
And that's been understood, and the fix is being taken care of. Thank you.
And again, I'm gonna send the questions to the board again because I know you're making faces, but like the fact that there was no competitive bid for this contract is really upsetting when you have processes in place. Are you able to say there are no conflicts of interest between the state board and SREB?
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
yes. Yeah. Do you have any evidence?
Not
of
a
that?
not a single member of the State Board of Education has any kind of business relationship with SREB.
Well, that's not the same as your question.
Does anyone have the appearance of a conflict of interest with SREB?
I trust my colleagues would raise that issue if that was such.
I've certainly done work with them in the past, absolutely.
Your education consulting company
Sure, in the past.
has had SREB as a client.
It has, yeah.
And you were one of the instrumental people in bringing SREB on board for this work.
We were, the key was to bring Terry Holliday into
Well, I
this
could've
work,
brought
given his
I could have brought
work
Terry
across,
Holliday. Terry Holliday
given his work across the
was
country.
my superintendent advisor. We're not paying Terry Holliday, we're paying SREB $30,000.
No, we are paying Terry Holliday, was my understanding. I don't know the details of the contract. I was not involved in the contract.
Yeah, see, that's where we separated duties. Mr. Buxton was responsible for the scope because the work went through his committee. I was responsible for the contract.
No, the
So-
state board was responsible for the contract.
But,
You signed it in violation of the policies that you all put on this agency for contracts to be approved by the State Board of Education for these exact reasons. So that they follow the law, so that there's no appearance of conflict, so that no one can actually say, this doesn't look right. And all of that was ignored.
So in response to the questions that I hear them and the answers, it's been acknowledged that there was a mistake made with respect to the policy and that it's being remedied. So I appreciate your pointing out a mistake, just as it's the obligation of any of us to point out mistakes in contracting issues and to correct them. So my understanding is it is being corrected,
Okay.
and we'll move forward. And-
So I have questions that I've sent to the both of you a week and a half ago. I'll send that to the whole board. We hope to be able to get answers for that, because it is my responsibility as the agency head to figure out what happened here. So I'll send those questions, and I'm sure we can work through it, and we'll find a solution to this issue. I'm very troubled by the solution being, hey, we had a contract agreement for $30,000. They did all the work they said they would do for $30,000, but we can just go back and we can get that under the threshold. They'll give us a discount. That's not proper stewardship of taxpayer dollars.
All right,
I have a question. The reduction in the contract, is there also a reduction in the services?
I don't know. I'm not the person who's responsible for this contract. I've never seen this contract until we were told to pay the amount.
I mean,
And-
has the service,
Apparently, there's going to be a fix.
thank you.
So I will resend those questions to the entire board so we can hopefully get some answers on what happened here. Thank you.
all right. So that's the question we had, that I did not know was coming, and I apologize for it. I didn't know it was gonna be raised, or I would not have said that, no one's raised anything, and I apologize for that. No
Well,
board
but-
member, no board member
But to be
had.
fair, yeah, okay. A week and a half ago, I sent you these questions
Yeah.
and nobody answered them.
Well, there's no sense revisiting. There was an exchange, and Mr. Davis had taken responsibility at the time of the exchange, and you have made your point. And again, I would say thank you for pointing out the issue, as we will do as well if it's ever necessary, because we work together. We should work together. So that then brings us to plan contracts report, and I have not heard any issues about that one from any board member. The Sandy Hook Promise part of the contract did remind some board members to ask, can we get an update on that forthcoming sometime shortly? Because as it's being implemented and rolled out, there's interest in knowing how that's going, because it's an important safety aspect of the work that's being done by the department. So if we can get that on an update agenda sometime soon. Finally, we have the School Business Systems Modernization Report, which has been a requested update. And I see that Dr. Spano is here to provide that report. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan. I'll try to recover some of your time. I know, well, you are up against the clock. Quickly, we'll go through agency modernization, LEA modernization, data transparency, and then I'll have some time for questions at the end. I really want to bring it in a picture why it's broken down like that and how it all fits together, how it all connects. I mean, prior to my tenure here at the agency, most of the data came in flat files or PDF reports. Some data was pushed into a state operational data store that was hosted by PowerSchool, our SIS provider. We'll talk more about how that's been being moved to a central repository. The goal here is to get our hands on the data. Data is the platform we're going to build our modern future on. Every presenter before me talked about data. whether it's not in their hands and they can't analyze it, or it's wrong, or it's late. It's all about data. So this is all built around centralizing our data and protecting our data. So I'll start with the agency stabilization. In order to modernize, you have to stabilize. When I think about, I took a wall down in my house, you just can't take a wall down. You have to stabilize both sides of it, remove the wall, put a beam in, remove the stabilization. It's the same in systems modernization. You have to stabilize the environment because it has to survive modernization, which is not easy, it's not cheap, it's not quick. So stabilizing, we moved 13 DPI systems with technology services to both DIT and SAS. We have one server still here in the data center that's performing testing. That will move eventually once they're done with the testing. So all the hardware that was in this building, in the data center on the third floor, is now hosted elsewhere. It's all been updated to the current versions for security and relocated to a more secure, if you will, facility, both east and west, replicated. On licensure, we formed a working group formed with Teach NC, Tomlin's department, my department, technology services. Licensure, again, is one of the most important pieces of our data. Again, I saw presentations about number of licenses for summer camp. Licensure is very important to us. We've actually finally modeled the as-is process. We now know how we do licenses, and I've seen improvement just in my 2 years. It's improved the time to get a license renewed. We're gonna make that better, more transparent. We're exploring an option to use a state enterprise through DIT. They have a new 8-step, if you will, 8 different area, what they call mini SOWs. So instead of going out for RFP, they've pre-qualified vendors in certain areas. We go, we write an SOW, we can use one of those pre-qualified vendors to shorten the time. Or we can leverage an existing state one and then issue services through one of those 8. We have to fix this because our current licensure system is old, it's custom, it's expensive, and it's insecure. And it doesn't serve our needs. Moving on to the new system for the state, NCAS is the system they use, we use for our accounting. They've chosen a new system. They're rolling that out. I've been working with the CFO to get on that program and get it moving. It's in its early stages, so it's not a whole lot to report yet. Just know that it's modern, very modern, used by most industries. It's a very good system. It's gonna take us a while to learn where they're going so we can figure out how we're gonna intersect with them. Grants was probably one of the things that I really like to talk about. As I saw Dr. Michaels up here talking about CTE, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We had school safety grants come online in September. It was a proof of concept. It's not a great grant system, but it's a grant system. We're gonna replace that in June, working with Bo to get a better grant system for school safety. In February, we brought CTE live, and early results are that it's working really well for them. We're working on the exceptional children portion of it. That will be done in April. And again, we're replacing paper systems in some cases, not computer systems, paper systems. And now we're working on BAS, the budget and amendment system. We're gonna start doing the requirements in April. Along agency modernization, again, working with Dr. Tomlin's group on educator recruitment and support. I think last board meeting before you saw teach.nc.org. That was through a grant done through school business modernization and Dr. Tomlin to get that up and running to recruit and attract more teachers. We're gonna tie that in with statewide job board, which goes live by the end of this month for some of our applicant tracking systems. This is where teachers log in and apply for jobs. Right now, they have to go to the individual districts. So now they'll be able to go to one place to see those jobs. On the same place, they see why it's good to be a teacher in North Carolina. That will be done by the summer 2020 for all applicant tracking systems. We have 5 of them. Then we're gonna integrate our licensure wizard. What's a wizard? It's an easy way to navigate through the complex licensure process. So even though we're simplifying the process, having a wizard that allows teachers that want to become licensed a quick and easy way to follow the path, tie it to educator preparedness programs, et cetera. So a wizard is very important. Again, we didn't add it up here, but we're gonna have an applicant wizard as well to help applicants get through the complex system of applying for jobs. Again, back to stabilization, this time externally, not internally. When I started in December of 2017, there were 50 LEAs on the EdCloud at SAS. What is that? It's a more modern version of an old AS400. It's an I-series running OS400. Still not modern by any shape or form, but it's more modern than an AS400, which is old. Now, only a handful of LEAs are left running AS400 loads. You can see up there, the purple will be done by the end of March. The gray is LEAs that have chosen not to move. Either they don't have them because they're Wake or Charlotte, or they don't want to move because they're already off of the AS400 and are on an incumbent vendor's product. So we've gone from 50 to 109 in a short period of time. So we've stabilized the AS400 environment. We did a competitive bid process to replace the finance and HR systems at the LEAs. Those were the AS400s, for the most part. We had LEA representatives on the RFP. We had LEA representatives do the selection and vote on their solution. And now the LEAs have picked 2 vendors, Tyler Technologies and Cherry Road Oracle. I'll have some stats on those in another slide about how far along we've gone on that. Golden template, you'll see this in a lot of my presentations. What does it mean? It's the thing that makes us North Carolina versus Nebraska versus Idaho, what our systems are, what we have to look like. Rather than make that 115 times plus charter schools, we're doing it once. So it's called the Golden Template. We need to have 2 of them. We've actually gotten a long way on e-procurement, working with state procurement and Ariba. Cash management was demoed at NC ASBO by a vendor last month. So we had over 15 partner demonstrations of all these ancillary systems, benefits, CEUs, and other key financial topics like cash management. So we are moving on integrating into the Golden Template all those things one way for each vendor. The same way, just different technologies. So pilots are underway in 8 districts around the state. Many more in the planning stages. I'll talk a little about why we're having to slow that down in a minute, but there's a lot of pilot opportunities. We had to turn people away. A lot of people wanted to jump sooner rather than later. We did pick pilots that represent a range of LEA sizes. We have Charlotte Meck at one end of the spectrum. We have New Hanover, we have Cabarrus, Cleveland. So a few of them in there, varying sizes. We've been leveraging the Golden Template work. They've been both working on their own LEA configurations as well as how does it connect to the Golden Template. All of this is so that we can do a rinse and repeat. When the pilot work is done, rolling out newer LEAs will be easier, faster, and cheaper. So we did have a steering committee. We're going to set up a steering committee for waves. We call them waves, grouping groups together to go forward. Those are currently on hold because of the state budget impasse. I'll talk about that in another slide. But right now, no state budget since July 1st. I'm running on last year's funds. We've had to slow down a lot of our work without funding. 19 LEAs have selected Tyler, 12 have selected Cherry Road. They're different technologies. I would argue there's benefits to either of them, but some LEAs like Tyler, some LEAs like Cherry Road. I'm glad we have more than one. Although it'd be easier for me if we had just one, then I just have one copy to roll out, but it's about the LEAs. So the goal is other LEAs will be adding modern systems as the state budget gets approved. Data consolidation and visualization. The real reason why we're doing all this, again, the LEAs are the source of our data. The student information system is the source of our data. The EC system is the source of our data, but it all has to go somewhere. We have to consolidate it and then use that. Smart people like Dr. Tomerlin, Dr. Galloway have to go and analyze that data and make sense of it. It's easier to do when it's in one place and you have tools like analytics. You can do a better job with the data, faster, more accurate. Before the data gets in the warehouse, we'll know if the data is consistent. We don't have to wait 2 weeks for people to crawl through PDFs to find out they're missing 3 LEAs. That'll be instantaneous in the data warehouse. So far, we stood up a dashboard. You can click on that link, NC School Finances, and you can actually see those screens over there and move the gauges and move them around. That was based on last year's. We're working on this year's annual report. The ODS is live for the student information system, has been since December of 18, so it's on its, we missed a birthday. And since then, we've added, this past year, the student information system attendance records. Why is that so phenomenal? It's a huge amount of data. Attendance is a huge amount of data. And we're having to push that to ancillary systems, causes a lot of stress on the SIS. By moving it to the ODS, then eventually to the reporting data warehouse, nobody is asking the student information system questions. They're asking the data the questions. So we don't slow down our delivery of education to report on education. That's why we separated them. We're also expanding our longitudinal database, known as CEDARS, to bring financial information into what was not there before and bring other data like applicants. We've never actually stored applicant data. And so a good question is how many applicants applied for that open teacher position? Can't answer it because we never collected it. So we've had to expand our model. We're basing it on something called CEDS, Common Education Data Standard. It's published by the feds. Lots of states use it. It's what we're using as a standard. Good or bad, it's our standard. And then our reporting data warehouse will be based on that. Why? We can connect any education provider to that data because it's a standard. Around that standard, we use something called UERS, which has a different meaning for some people. Some people think of it as a system because the S is a system. I think of it more as a specification. It tells the world what data we need, when we need it, what format we need it in. Right now, it's mostly financial, mostly student information. We're expanding it into applicants, etc. Budget overview, everybody's fun topic. Just so you know, SPSM is only intended to fund the transition to modern. It's not meant to sustain modern. That's not my role. That would be other people's role. Primarily, it's non-recurring costs, but the way it's spread out over multiple years, a recurring funding stream is necessary in order to keep stability. This year's an example. I've had no money, had to slow things down, and restarting is not a day for day. If you stop for a day, it takes a month to start. If you stop for 2 months, some of those people have quit or retired, and restarting becomes retraining everybody. And then there's re-winning their confidence, which may or may not happen. We've already had LEAs tell us they're gonna stay in their current system. They're not gonna start and stop. So it's already beginning to affect our trust that the LEAs see in our program. There is some ongoing operational expenses which will have to be borne by the operating. For example, if we happen to have a new system for, I don't know, counting daffodils, I don't want to pick any one particular system. Whatever it is today, non-modern, it's going to be more expensive modern. So we have to tweak those costs to support the more modern systems. Besides the one-time lift and shift of getting to modern. Our single largest project is obviously the LEA migration. There's a lot of them, and some of them are very, very large, very, very expensive at the big end. But it's necessary. If we don't do this, we won't get our data. We won't get it efficiently or effectively, and we haven't even broached the big S, the scary S, security. You can imagine an AS400 is not very secure. So our financial data, our HR data is sitting in systems that aren't really very secure. So security is not a footnote. Security is another reason why we're doing this. So it's going to continue in waves over the next 5 or more years. The more it comes on when we get a state budget. It was 5, but now it's 5 or more. The more, again, will be as soon as we get it and how much we get. Right now, the cost for LEAs alone is $100 million. Now, it sounds scary, but it was estimated before I started at $150 to $220 million for the project. So it's right in where it should be. So it's not a new number that scares us. It's just a number. There's also, speaking of stabilization, the legacy vendors who have borne the low-cost systems for so long are raising their prices to recover their investments. It's a natural thing when you know you're being replaced. They raise their prices. Not unfairly, in some cases unfairly, depending on the raise. Some are as high as 413%, which I would say goes more towards the unfair side. That's a problem if we keep delaying modernizing, because legacy vendors will be here longer and have to make more investments. So here is the actual budget. I just want to point out that 2021 seems larger than all the others because we've had no funding in 1920. So a lot of the stuff has slipped into this year. It'll be a much smoother curve if we had made those investments and done those projects in this year. So there's the budget. I've got some agency level modernization in there, things like licensure, things like modernizing the student information system. Modernizing NCAS is not in there because they don't know what it is. The state hasn't told me what it looks like, so I can't tell you whether it's a bread box or a buffalo. So if I give you a number for a buffalo or a bus, it scares everybody. So I'd want to wait till the state has better planning and we know exactly how much of their system we're going to leverage and what the integrations look like. So that's not included here. I just put a brief history up here. You probably all live this and know this, but some people may or may not know. The teachers, for example, the teachers here may not know that we did pass an expansion budget. We requested $30 million recurring. It was changed in 966 to $12 million this year, $35 million next year. It was ratified and passed and then vetoed. There was a mini bill pulled out, HB 398, which was ratified and vetoed again, and then they went on Addison, so no money. I know I made that rather quickly, Chairman Davis, Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, and board, but it's a lot of information. I'd rather answer your questions than talk at you. So any questions?
Questions and comments? I've got a few.
Okay.
You mentioned the pilots for the first wave of adoption and recited those. In doing that, has have the department entered into memorandums of understanding with those districts and the, or LEAs in the first wave of pilots?
Yes.
All right. And have any of those been brought to the board for approval?
No.
Are you aware under board policy they were supposed to be brought to the board for approval?
I was not.
With respect, you mentioned the issues with respect to the budget, which have caused difficulty for your work in the last year, as you pointed out in your report. Are there, if there is no budget reached, which happened last year unfortunately to you, and you, I think your expectation was about $30 million under the, what had been set up before. If we reach the end of this fiscal year and there's no budget yet reached going into the next fiscal year, do you have the ability to go forward with your work at that point?
No, we're out of money at the end of this year. We would have to execute the clauses in the master services agreement and put the project officially on hold until funding's secured.
Do we have any plan B for, I mean, obviously that would be a, as you've already demonstrated in your report, that would be a result none of us want to see. Is there any kind of plan B that
I
we
have
could
Plan
take a
B,
look at?
C, D, and E. I don't think we should share them here, but I do have plans.
It was a
for
yes or
budget.
no question, yeah.
No, yes, there are planning if there is no state budget secured, because we have to stabilize and survive. But it will be exactly that, I'm being honest with you, it'll be stabilize and survive, because those AS400s are no longer supported hardware-wise, and as of December of last year, the operating system is no longer supported. So now even the most modern hardware sitting in the Ed Cloud can't help us, because the operating system has no patches for security. Remember that S I talked about, security? It becomes bigger. And when security gets broken, it makes the paper every single time, because it's what people know is going to happen. So we gotta fix it. Forget financial, forget data. If we don't replace those aging infrastructure, we're not gonna secure it. So it's another burden that we didn't have when we started, because we thought we'd have it done before the OS went out of production. So, by the way, that's 30 years these systems have been online. That's a long time for anybody. So, Chairman Duncan, I'm sorry that was a long answer, but go ahead.
No, I appreciate the answer. It's an important topic, so I appreciate you putting it in proper context. I think that is important. So let me stop in terms of any questions that would ask you to go into areas you prefer not to. But I would ask that you provide us copies of the memorandum of understandings, if at all possible, by the end of the day, if you can do that.
No, those are being redone. They're in
We're
legal
redoing
right
them
now.
all to be submitted to the board formally.
Have you been operating under them before?
On my signature, yes. Based on my assumption that the master services agreement was the formal document and these were just work orders. Members of understanding. I come from industry where that's all they are. It says, here's the master services agreement, here's your prices in the master service agreement. You have an SOW between you and the vendor. It was just an agreement that these are the prices in the master service agreement, that we understand each other.
Well, we've been operating under the memorandum of understandings with the LEAs, but they have not been brought to the board till now.
Correct. The
How
board,
long- how
the
long
board
is it?
attorney reviewed the MOUs before they were released, the model, and then we released them.
How long have we been operating under them, approximately?
Since June.
All right, thank
When
you.
it was brought to my attention, I decided we're gonna have them all rewritten and submitted to the board.
And we are doing that, and I think
Already.
you might be changing the contract policy, but the contract policy does not include memorandums of agreement. So you can see why there was some confusion here by DPI staff saying, well, if it says memorandums of agreement or not, contracts to be brought to the board, will move forward. We've caught all this, and we're going through legal again, and we're going to bring everything to the board.
All right, without getting into a back and forth of which there's no benefit for anybody, it is actually in board policy under CNTR 002. But that's,
No, without getting in back and forth, because that doesn't help anybody, the term contract does not include memorandums of agreement.
well, I don't share that view, but again, let's just move
I'm
forward.
looking,
Let's
Mr. Duncan,
move
I'm reading
forward.
it right here on my computer.
Well, we're
The
gonna-
term contract does not include I'm agreeing with you. This should come to the board, and that is what we are doing. But I'm explaining why Mr. Spano took the actions he took. So I just want to be very clear about this is board policy. We at DPI work hard to operate under board policy.
I appreciate the explanation. I also appreciate enacting under it at this point. We've, since June of last year, acted under a memorandum of understanding, which I think under any legal definition is a contract. We've acted under it and the board has not seen it. So I think we move forward from here and we resolve the issue by getting copies, and I appreciate it.
Any other questions, Chairman Duncan, for me?
Do not have any further. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you all.
And that concludes our report.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. We'll now proceed to the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee. And Ms. White, I recognize you as chair of that committee.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chair Davis. I'm Amy White, and I chair the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee, along with Ms. Jill Kamnitz, who is traveling today. And so we are happy to provide for you a robust agenda. And so that was I'm so sorry, but that was very dry, that past 30 minutes. So I need audience participation, if you will. Sorry. So if you would, everyone in the gallery, if you will please raise your right hand after me and say, "Congrats." Congrats. Now, raise your left hand and say, "Chule." Chule. All right, so we're going to do that again. Ready? Congrats. Congrats. Chule. Chule. All right, and then you're going to put your arms out like this. Shunsta. Bari. Bari. Shunsta. Shunsta. Bari. Bari. All right, ready? Congrats. Congrats. Chule. Chule. Shunsta. Shunsta. Bari. Bari. If you put that all together, it's Congrats. Chule. Shuns. Tabari. For being named a National Principal Candidate of the Year. Congratulations to my team and my colleagues.
Oh, God, I didn't think I could turn red. Oh, my God.
Got it. All right, now to very important work. I am excited to talk to you about the new business on our agenda today. We have a presentation by the North Carolina Virtual Partnership Program. As you know, North Carolina's Virtual Academy has been operating as a charter school in the state, providing online opportunities for students to address unique challenges and unique coursework. And so this new partnership program is going to push that opportunity out to the districts to allow them to use local teachers to deliver instruction. And they are here to talk to us today, and I believe we have guests. Is that not right, Dr. Colbert? Thank you so much for being patient with us as we have had a lengthy agenda this afternoon, but we are excited to hear. With no further ado, Dr. Liz Colbert, the Executive Director of MC Virtual.
So, thank you. And with all due respect, we're North Carolina Virtual, not the Academy, because that is the charter school. Our role in the state is to partner with the public, private, home schools, and charter schools of the state in order to help them teach every child well. And so what we want to present to you is another way we believe we can partnership with districts to help them with that awesome challenge. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Mia Murphy. She's the Chief Operations Officer for North Carolina Virtual. She and her team have been working on this project for a very long time. She is the expert, so I felt that was best to have the expert present it to you. So, Dr. Murphy, lots of pressure.
Good afternoon, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, and the rest of the board. And we are indeed very excited today. This session is called New Business, and it's very aptly titled because we're going to tell you about a new way of doing business for NCVPS. And we're fortunate to have some school partners who are going to share with you their experiences with our partnership courses program. So whenever we endeavor to look at a new way of providing services to the districts and schools and thus impacting students, we always go back to our mission or vision. And the reason that NCVPS was formed was so that regardless of zip code, students would have opportunity. That they would have exposure to high quality courses and expanded options in education. So this is just a brief history. So we started in the summer of 2007, and it was a whirlwind. About 17,000 enrollments, 77 courses, and 2 programs. So that is 2018, 2019. We had roughly about 52,000 enrollments, 150 courses, and 7 programs. So a lot of growth in 12 short years. Sorry about that. So how we position and envision ourselves in this work, in this online and digital learning space, is we work to be the solution. So we want to ensure that what was thought to be impossible to happen and to occur in the teaching and learning space, that we can make the impossible possible. So that's where we work to be. And so we're always listening to our stakeholders to make sure that we're on the pulse of what they need, how we can provide a solution, and what we can work to recreate and ensure that solutions occur for them. So along that line, we came to about 4 years or so, maybe close to 5. We had been in existence about 7 years or so. So we realized that many of our districts and schools, they really wanted to start their own virtual academies, meaning that they were looking to attract homeschool, private school students, drop back in programs where students had dropped out, or really just expand their options for their students. So within that space and how we envisioned that we could help is, you don't have to worry about the teaching and learning. So our teacher will teach the students in our course that's specifically made for North Carolina. We'll also assist you with your marketing efforts. You're gonna have to worry about the infrastructure, but talking to parents, communication channels, all of that we will take care of. And for about 2 or 3 years, that's how we were working with districts in that virtual academy space. But of course, schools and districts, they evolve. So now, currently, what we had been hearing from our stakeholders is that we want to move a little bit beyond, and we actually want to have a little bit more control over the teaching and learning, the calendaring, and how the actual learning occurs. And so what our stakeholders were telling us is that we actually want to use our teachers. But one of the biggest barriers to that is the course, because it is actually quite difficult to build an online course. This is all we do, and it takes us about a year to be able to build a course that we feel that a student and a teacher can teach and the student can learn from. And so with the district and schools, this is not what you innately do. It's our business, and so the courses were a barrier. Also, of course, the teacher training. So assuming that if you're an excellent face-to-face teacher, that's also going to translate into brick and mortar excellence. That doesn't always occur without some type of preparation. So, listening to our stakeholders, and really this has been about a 2.5-year process. We developed what we're calling the NC Virtual Partnership Courses Program. So this is where we're helping districts to expand their online course offerings. So the difference is they're going to use their own teachers. It's NCVPS's course. We're going to provide the technology, the content, and the training to help them build their virtual program. And the pluses are, of course, the local control that is wanted. When it is offered locally, you do have a great deal of flexibility. There's more opportunity, and there are more options for students. Let's talk briefly about how the partnership program works. So this is our traditional program, how we've really been in existence for the last 13 years. So on the left-hand side, you have the school and the district's responsibility. So they essentially, let us teach their children. On the right-hand side, you have our responsibility. So we have our teacher. We're using our learning management system, Canvas, our registration system to enroll the students. We utilize our help desk for any and every question. Our help desk is open, so it doesn't matter who you are in North Carolina. You can pose a question in our help desk and someone is going to answer you usually within an hour. And we also provide the professional development to properly train our teachers to teach online for NCVPS. I always preface that because online learning is different depending on the situation, and so we prepare teachers to teach for NCVPS. So conversely, in our partnership courses, this is the difference. So the school and district, they're going to use their own teacher with their students. We are still going to provide their learning management system, so the courses will be housed in our learning management system. They'll still use our registration system to enroll the students. Help desk, if there's anything wrong with the course, students need support, links broken, what have you, we're going to work to fix that. And that I want to really focus it on the professional development, where that in our traditional program, that's us training our NCVPS teacher. For the partnership program, that is us training the local district teacher. Because you really just cannot make the assumption that teaching excellence just transfers across modality. And plus, we want to make sure that all the nuances of the NCVPS course, that the teacher is properly prepared to instruct students. Also included in that professional development is some administrative support and professional development, because we want the administrative staff to be prepared to support that teacher in that online learning, because it will look a little bit different. While the instrument for evaluation will be the same, how you're going to look at feedback, grading, all those different things. We want to make sure that the administrator is prepared for that. So those are the differences in what we offer traditionally and our new partnership courses. So along the lines of how this impacts currently how we're legislating, there really is no impact. The legislation already outlines alternative paths for funding. So how districts would pay for the partnership courses are already outlined in funding. You use title funds, local funds, contingency reserve funds, some special education funds, so that's already outlined. So there's no change to legislation in our traditional program, and that's more allotment based. But our primary drivers for developing the program and the costs are really, scaling this and figuring out what that will be, the scope, and really making sure this is sustainable. So costing wise, what we're thinking is that it will be roughly a third of the cost of our traditional program. It's always paid by enrollment, so roughly the cost of how much it costs to enroll a student in our traditional program. So here, we are lucky to be a part of a consortium called the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance, VLLA. That is pretty much the only place where we can have job-alike peers. So we share resources, ideas, collaborate. These are all state-led virtual schools. And the ones that you see circled are the ones that are either piloting or already have. And you see the name franchise. Until about 6 months ago, we just called this franchise. We needed a better name. So partnerships seem to fit a lot better. But all of those state-led schools are in some stage of developing a similar program to us. There are nuances to each because each state is different in how they operate. But we are definitely not alone in it. So actually 8 of the 15 are developing some type of partnership or franchise program. So looking at how we have worked on this, developing our program and looking at implementation science, we are actually right now in the initial implementation stage of implementation science. And the next 2 slides are just a really brief overview of our timeline and what we've done so far. This has actually been 2 years in the making. In 1819, we partnered with Wake County Schools. 1920, we partnered with Moore, and also with Charlotte Meck. We hope to go statewide in the fall of 2020. So just before we introduce our school partners, just want to do a brief overview of our partners that we've had over the last couple of years. We started in 1819 with Crossroads Flex. If you're not familiar, Crossroads Flex is Wake's blended program right here in Cary, and they partnered with us for English 2. Their program was unique in that they used a Crossroads Flex teacher to teach Cary High School students. With Moore County is working to develop their own virtual program, and we're thinking their program will probably mirror how most will utilize us, meaning the program is for the district and both high schools are able to utilize it, and they utilize us for honors psychology. And here today we have Charlotte Virtual High School, and they partnered with us just this year in 1920 for Math 1 and Math 3. Charlotte Virtual is a standalone school with its own code, and they are a fully virtual school in Charlotte Mecklenburg schools. So here we just have a few advantages of the partnership program. Most notably, I think I talked a little bit about how we were trying to work on the scope. So what we're proposing to start with are our courses that have gone through the Quality Matters review and certification. We have about 21, soon to be 24 of those for our partners to choose from. And so that means they have an external validation of quality. All of our courses are aligned to state standards. We are working to ensure that we have implementation support throughout, so it's not a situation where you start and that's it. We have staff who are dedicated to support. Of course, we're talking about the teacher PD and the administrator PD, and we're really working to expand the digital capacity of schools. So I'm going to turn it over now to our partners to tell about their experience. I want to introduce you to Ms. Stephanie Hood. She's the principal of Charlotte Mecklenburg Virtual High School, and Ms. Alice McLean. She's a math teacher, and they'll tell you a little bit more about their experience with our partnership program.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Murphy, and good afternoon, board. Thank you for having us today. Good afternoon. I am Stephanie Hood, principal of Charlotte Mecklenburg Virtual High School. And our high school, just to give you a little information, is about 240 students. We have 5.5 teachers, so we have 1 per content area and a part-time EC teacher. And then we have some support staff, such as a counselor and a career development coordinator, academic facilitator. So being new to Charlotte Mecklenburg Virtual High School, I started last year, well, I guess that would be 2 years now, October of 2018. And I knew that being new to the principalship and also new to this virtual learning experience that I would need some support. So I reached out to our partners at NC Virtual, who were right there with me to help me understand and get acclimated to online learning and all of its processes. The other thing that I quickly learned was that the content course provider that we were using, so we used a combination of things. We used Canvas, where our teachers would create courses. We used North Carolina Virtual as a partner for electives and some other courses, but we also used another course provider that was provided by our district. What I discovered in a few months was that content course provider was not robust enough for us to meet the needs for our students to be successful on end-of-course state standards and testing. The course that was provided and the information that was supplied in the courses was too vague for our students to be able to perform well. So I knew that we needed a change, but I knew that the ask that I was going to have to make of our teachers to develop course content was going to be significant, considering the challenges of having 1 teacher per course. Right on time, my partners came through,
And they were in the development with the franchise courses. And so we saw that, particularly in math, as a perfect opportunity for us to utilize them. And so we chose to use the franchise or the partnership courses in Honors Math 1, Honors Math 3, and Standard Math 3. So I'll let Ms. McLean tell you a little bit about what her direct involvement in that is as a math teacher at our school and how that's impacted the students in her daily work.
Good afternoon. I'm Alice McLean, and I am the math teacher at Charlotte Mecklenburg Virtual High School. And I just want to speak on just a bit the difference between working with the North Carolina Virtual Partnership and other course providers, because we spent a great deal of time researching, looking at other providers, and the provider that I was using before, as Ms. Hood stated, was really not robust enough. Too many clicks, too many opportunities to copy, paste, and Google answers, which became more of a norm. With the virtual partnership course, that doesn't happen. The courses are engaging. I copied, paste, Googled, could not find any answers, could not find any problems close to it. They have excellent use of Webb's depth of knowledge embedded within the course, as well as pathways to use differentiation with students. So it's a very, very good, strong course that's very close or mimics what you would see in a good face-to-face classroom.
One byproduct that Ms. McLean mentioned was that in the partnership courses, students are directed to a pathway based on their performance on a formative assessment. So the differentiation happens naturally and it's already created. As a byproduct of that, some of our teachers have chosen to use that same format in Canvas. So when we were using Canvas, this was not a feature that was used. And so now natural progression of professional development has happened as we even utilize these partnership courses. So, so this is the pilot, and we just finished our first semester. On the slide, you will see a comparison from our students who took the Math 1 and Math 3, this is Math 3, EOCs from last fall to this fall's test administration. And as you can see, our grade level proficiency from 2018-19 to 19-20 has increased significantly. Our career and college readiness performance has increased significantly. So what we've done is made a change in the course provider. We've also allowed Ms. McLean to have more time to respond to student needs. So there's no finding materials. There's no trying to supplement. Her time is utilized in response to students. This slide that you see next is first semester Math 1, and we're comparing fall to fall, and then in the spring we'll do an aggregate comparison. But from fall to fall, our grade level proficiency has increased almost 8 percentage points. Where our challenge still is in raising the career and college readiness results for our students in Math 1. I feel very good because we have the opportunity with these courses to respond to individual student needs and give them the attention that they need. And so I feel confident that those scores will raise as well. We've had a lot of success in these. I am actually When I leave out of here, going to talk to our folks at NC Virtual about expanding our use of partnership courses to a science course. And so we feel like it's really come in handy. It's been a game changer for us in time and responsiveness.
Wonderful. Colleagues, any questions from you about this new and innovative approach for instructional delivery? Seeing none, I will just say thank you for traveling from Charlotte Meck to Raleigh today to showcase what you're doing. 8 percentage points is certainly nothing to sneeze about. It is for us to cheer about. So those fundamentals in mathematics instruction are so important. So thank you for that. Kudos to Mia and Liz Dr. Colbert and anyway, for bringing this particularly in a timely fashion today, partnered with what we heard this morning from Lieutenant Governor Forrest, continued push for digital learning and expansion across our state, for providing a multitude of ways to allow our students to learn that sometimes does not mean that they're in the classroom with a teacher right in front of them. So meeting students where they are in an individualized, personalized way. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Board members, we are going to move to our action items. First on our agenda today under action is the discussion about Hobgood Charter School's request to expand to high school. Have Dave Machado with us, and I think, yes, Alex Quigley is in the room. So, board members, just to remind you what happened. It's now March. In January, we had an item that was part of discussion from Hobgood that was a request for us to expand only to 9th and 10th grade, and we pulled that from our agenda. They actually decided to amend their request and go ahead and be transparent in their request to us to expand to a high school. And so I'm gonna ask Dave Machado to sort of, and Alex to walk us through where they are in that request, and then I'll allow you any opportunities that you have for questions about their expansion request. Mr.
Thank you, Ms.
Machado.
White. And just a recap of what we talked about in January, Hobgood Charter School is requesting to expand to high school. The amendment that is before you now is to get full approval to expand 9 through 12, but only do one grade at a time. So next year, it'll be 9th grade, the following year, 10th grade, 11th and 12th. They're in Halifax County, currently in K-8, and this is their first year of operation. And as you know, that was a conversion from a private school. Their ADM is 226 students, and out of those 226, only 66 came from the academy. So you can tell it's been a huge influx of new students in the area, so it certainly is serving the entire community. This year, K-8 had 225 students. The amendment's requesting year 2 will be K-9, 250. Year 3, K-10, 275. Year 4, K-11, 300. And year 5, K-12, 325. And that is the exact same enrollments that was in their original application. So again, they're not asking for an enrollment increase. They're just asking for a grade increase. They currently have 20 8th graders that, if this amendment's not approved, would have to be dispersed and sent back to wherever they came from. I think out of the 20 8th graders, only 8 came from Hobgood Academy. So again, it's an influx of new students. This school is using a weighted lottery. It does have a free and reduced lunch program. It does offer transportation. Currently has 3 buses running. If this amendment is approved, they'll add 2 more buses. They are 30% EDS, 25% African American, 6% Hispanic, and 9% students with disability. And with their head count for this year, they will qualify to be a Title I school. Closest high school to the school is 18 miles away. You do have their NC check-in scores. And again, this is a extremely strong board, extremely strong leader. And we feel like our office, as did CSAB, vote unanimously. We feel like this is a amendment that should be approved. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions from, yes, sir, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question, I'm new to the side of it. First year of operation, on approval to go year by year up to the 12th grade, correct?
Yes, sir.
And they're K-8 now.
Yes, sir.
They don't have data because they're just their first year of operation. That's how successful they have been at K-8. I did read about the comments of the parents. I mean, they're excited about it. Once or twice, you say something about, when we talk about issues like this, what the law says. I heard you and pointed that to me. But doesn't it say 3 years? Had to be in 3 years before. So help me here. You see where I'm going?
I do.
All right, help me to get my hands around that so I'll know what I'm voting on or whatever, but help me now, you told me to look at the law.
I love it.
Okay.
Hey, look, I think, and Mr. Snyder's back there too, but
Well, Mr. Snyder?
Yeah.
Because I'm not being funny.
So on eBoard, you have the statute in print that suggests that General Statute 115C-218.8 says it shall not be considered a material revision of the charter if 3 things happen. 1, that it's operated for the past 3 years. 2, if it's not been identified as continually low performing, or 3, has been in financial compliance as required by the board. So because they're asking for a change, it would be a material change to their charter. Mr. Quigley, I want to ask you, during their initial charter application, they applied to be a K-12 school. What happened there? Can you walk us through how they originally wanted to be K-12 and what CSAB recommended?
Yes, thank you. So this school, I can't remember if it was 2 times or 3 times. They applied 3 times, and so they went through a number of rounds with us. And I think in their initial applications, they wanted to be a K-12 school, and I think the recommendations from the board were that they were underestimating the complexity of the work of transitioning from a private school to a public school, publicly funded school, and that would be most acute in the area of high school and most difficult because they have so few students. They had a small number of high school students, and then to run a full square, which is what they were asking for, basically transition from a private school K-12 to a public school K-12, where you bear all the burdens of course requirements and all those things, but you have a very small number of students, and how are you going to staff that? So our recommendation was very clear: you should not apply at the onset of your application for a high school. You should get the K-8 off the ground, make that transition, and then consider high school after that. It took them 3 chances. They've made the transition into operating the K-8 school. I think if they said, hey, we actually want to open 9 to 12 next year and we want to take new students, we would have said no. I think the fact that they're basically going to slow grow this from 8th grade up gave the CSAB confidence that process would allow them to build a larger student body than they had when they were a private school, and then slowly develop all the complex components that are, high school is very difficult, as the high school principals here know, and as you all know. I think it's particularly difficult to meet all the requirements with such a small student population. So we felt confident if they're going more slowly that this made sense. And if they feel that they can do that and there's no kind of other glaring compliance issues, that, you know, we would recommend them to move forward and do that.
Did that help you at all?
Help me some,
Okay.
but what's being asked of us to do is to agree to a 9/12, even though it's year by year by year, but it's still 9/12 that we're being asked to approve.
Right.
And that's out years. I mean, none of us know what 10th grade is gonna produce, or the 11th grade. But I would feel better with year by year, even though I know it has to come back. But that's out years you're talking about there.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we consider all these types of recommendations on case by case basis. Obviously, if they waited 3 years and met these requirements, it wouldn't be a material
Correct.
revision, so it could be something
Correct.
that OCS could have approved.
Correct.
So I also think that our board would have the capacity to reevaluate them next year and bring them before us and say, even if you approve the amendment as is, we could certainly have them come before us, give us an update, and you know, certainly give an update to you all on our level of comfort with how things are going. But of course, totally up to you if you would like to change the amendment to just be 1 year at a time. That's also not difficult for us to do, to have them come and get data and then make a recommendation to you each year. Obviously, I think they you know, for their planning purposes, they would like to be able to tell parents, you know, there's a pathway here.
Sure. If you, there's benchmark data, which agreeably is not year-end data, but the benchmark data suggests that the students at the school are outperforming the local schools by more than double. And so there are 18 total 8th graders that would forward to becoming 9th graders in the next year. I saw Ms. Morris's question.
I too am very new to this, so I have a question for you. So it was a private school
Yes.
and then became a charter school, correct?
Yes, it was a private school conversion.
When a private school converts to a charter school, do the students who are at the private school automatically?
No, they have to re-lottery into the school.
Do you know about the percentage of the students at this school who were from the private school?
Yes, like I said earlier, out of the 226 students that are in right now, 66 came from the private school.
The private school.
If I might add an additional comment, there is if you will refresh your e-board, there is a letter that was sent yesterday to Ms. Kamnitz and to me addressing some of the data. And I actually had to the opportunity to talk by phone with Juliana Harris, and she explained that the school actually is Title I school, qualifies now to be a Title I school. 60 out of the current 8th grade class, which is 18 students, 8 of those students were from the private school. 2 of those were on opportunity scholarships. So the vast majority of the students and their families cannot afford private tuition. There are other private schools in the county that provide private education, but she strongly feels like these are students who are merely exercising their desire to have and provide the very best education possible for their students. Again, in the first attachment, which is a PDF file that provides you the digital charter and the data, it shows you, and I won't call them by name, but it shows you the performance scores of the other local schools. And Mr. Hall, to your point, I always talk about statute, then I talk about policy, and I talk about process and procedure. And this time I'm gonna add an M for mama. And if I had the opportunity to send my child to a school that was outperforming surrounding schools, then my M hat makes me say this is an excellent opportunity for school choice in a county that has been actually, I should celebrate the fact that it moved out of consistently low performing status last year. But that has an opportunity to place some children in a school where they can be successful.
May I?
Sure.
May I respond as quickly? My concern, my issue is not to do with the academic achievement of that school, when, that's not what I'm talking about. I know Hall School. Nothing wrong with it. I know the head coach there. Nothing wrong with them. So, you know, it's not that. And I hope I didn't come, if I came over that way.
You did not.
Right. But it does do with policy. It does do with my belief about having some benchmarks to make decisions upon. And that's just what it is. And that's me talking.
Yes, sir.
So I want to make sure that you understand, it has nothing to do with what you're doing and how well you're doing. I just think we should take it a little bit slower.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes, thank you, Ms. White. And I do appreciate Mr. Hall's attention and respect for the law and the general statutes, and that's really what we're compelled to do. We're required to do as members of the State Board and fashion policy thereby. But I'm going to tell you, I read the letter of the principal last night, and I read it, started reading it rather quickly, and then I got to a particular paragraph, and I decided to pause and just read it a couple more times. I remember Halifax County Schools. When I first came on the State Board of, even though this is was a private school, when I first came on the State Board of Education, Mr. Keenan and I, we're the seasoned members here on the board now, and veteran members on the board. And we spent a lot of, and you spent, prior to my coming, Reggie, you heard about that school system far more than I. And so I began thinking about the statement that had to do with the disadvantaged student population and kids of color and how well they are now performing. And I began seeing, you know what, these kids without the school, the continuation of the grade span and giving them access to an opportunity of excellence, they could easily be a data point in a report that we receive each year, the dropout prevention report. They could be a data point in that report. They could be a data point in our reports that deal with low performing schools, or a data point in our in-school suspension program, where a lot of our disadvantaged kids of color, ISS is almost a place of permanent residence during a 180-day school year. Or they could be a data point in our out-of-school suspension report. So that letter written by that principal, I'll have to get permission from the Office of Charter Schools and CSAB, because I'll remove the names of anybody mentioned in the letter, the principal. I would like permission to just make a copy of a portion of it and share with my graduate students, because it's almost a mission statement in terms of what that school means to disadvantaged kids. So I understand and appreciate the apprehension, but I'm given confidence in knowing that CSAB believes in it. The Office of Charter Schools believe in the possibility, the probability of a strong board of directors. I just would find it very, very difficult to say, to vote no to this recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. Buxton.
A question, it could be for Mr. Quigley or Mr. Machado. So I am wrestling with, it would be nice to think that we would cut down on any kind of mobility to these 18 eighth graders and make sure they don't have another transition to high school, that they're transitioning within a school that they now seem to be, check-ins doing pretty well. So that's important to me. It seems to me like approving a new charter in some ways, because it's a high school, and Mr. Quigley, to your point, high schools are a little bit of a different operation. And so it would be helpful from both of your perspectives, or one, just to hear why you think this one meets the threshold of an exception to before they even have a first full year of data. Understanding that I'm already with you on, I want to cut down mobility and transitions for kids for whom that can be difficult. Are there other things about their program that you would say, this is why this place deserves to have a new charter?
I went to Hobgood the first day of school. I don't know if anyone has ever been to Hobgood, North Carolina. It is, in all due respect to my colleagues in Hobgood, it is in the middle of nowhere. And that is a community school. This charter school is a community school now. I know that whenever you hear the word private conversion, you wonder, what's the motive of a school to convert? When I was there, you could sense the pride of that first day of school, not just by the board or the principal, but by the students and the teachers, and they were really celebrating. So the best way I can answer that question is that Hobgood Charter School is part of that community. We have 20 eighth graders that will be displaced. And again, they did come in front of CSAB 3 times. First time they got rejected, 2 days later, they're in my office. Dave, what do we need to do? Well, I think this is what you need to do. Second time they got rejected. Dave, what's going on? I think this is what you, I didn't write the application or anything like that, but they wanted to do everything they can to open up a school in that area for those students. So I saw the passion of the leadership. I saw the passion of the leader. I saw the passion of the teachers that day. This board does tremendous work supporting schools, restart models, which I totally support. Here's an opportunity to really support a school, even though it's just in its first year, the community's embraced, they've embraced the community, and I just think that they deserve to start a high school. I totally agree. 10, 11, and 12th grade out could have some pause whether they can do all that. We're going to approve them for one time, but I have all the confidence in the world that this is good, smart, controlled growth. And you can certainly, at any time, rescind this amendment if you feel like they don't deserve to have a 10th grade or 11th grade. But I think, as Mr. Quigley said, for them to plan, to grow, and give the parents the assurance that, yes, we're going to have a full high school, we would certainly prefer this amendment that's on the floor right now.
Further questions? So I have a procedure question. Hearing Mr. Hall and actually wanting to provide adequate and proper oversight so that when they do this, they do it right. Could we approve 9th and 10th grade, and then they have to come back before CSAB before we approve the expansion to 11th and 12th? Mr. Snyder's making hand signals that are sort of like congratulate, but anyway.
I think if you approve 9 and 10 now, by the time you got to that third year, the addition of another grade would be a non-material revision that wouldn't need to come back here.
So that's excellent advice. So I think that will be my recommendation tomorrow. If that would allow us to provide the proper review of their implementation of high school, that we would make a recommendation that they proceed with 9th and 10th grade expansion, no enrollment increase, but that they would need to appear before CSAB just to give a report, and at that point it would not be a material revision to charter. Yes?
Still 1 grade a year.
1 grade a year. 1 grade a year.
For clarification, Ms. White, you're saying that the amendment that's going to be voted on tomorrow, allowing them, giving them permission to expand 9th and 10th grade, but only 1 year at a time?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We'll move on to EICS 2. This is another expansion request to high school. This one's a little bit different. This is Charlotte Lab. It's a charter school in Mecklenburg County, currently serving grades K through 8. And before us to re-explain that is Mr. Machado. This is for action again. We heard this proposal last month and did not have a significant amount of questions about their request. This one's a little easier to swallow.
Okay, to reiterate the history on this school, and they are in Mecklenburg County, they're currently K-8, they have 639 students. They're in their sixth year of operation, and they are a B school. And again, they're asking for a grade expansion, not enrollment expansion, and they are allowed to grow up to 30% because they are a non-low performing school. And again, like Ms. White said, the reason that they did have a financial non-compliance several years ago for a short-term loan that they took out to expand their middle school, that has now been resolved. They've had a clean audit and they are not on financial non-compliant. It was asked at the last state board meeting, did they offer transportation? And yes, they do offer transportation. And they also, and the question was too, because they're one of the first schools to use a weighted lottery, and did we have any data on what their EDS population has been? When they opened up, their EDS population was 22% of their population. Last year it was 35%. So you can see that weighted lottery is increasing, meeting the goal they wanted, increasing their EDS population. So.
You'll remember this is the, so back to your question about policy and procedure, this is another request before us, and because they had not been financially compliant, it has to come before us for approval. So, and that was because of the temporary loan.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions about this particular request? Okay, wonderful. Hearing none, let's move to our 2019 charter school application recommendations. Board members, you heard last month about the applications, and those applications were posted for you on eBoard. There were a number of different applications, 14 to be exact. 6 made it through that process. Let's just go through each one of those, and Mr. Davis, I do expect that we will need to vote on each of those independently tomorrow during the voting process, just as a heads up.
Very
Okay. Huntersville Charter High School in Mecklenburg County. Does anyone have a question about Huntersville? Okay. Peak Academy Charter School in Buncombe County in Asheville. Any questions about Peak? Okay. Clara Science Charter Academy in Mecklenburg County. Mr. Buxton?
I do. Ms. White, this was one that we raised, I think this is the 6-4 vote, and we raised last time, and I was one of the ones who raised it. The concerns, and I'm going back to my notes here, we're concerned about the plan, the academic, the instructional plan, the nature of the saturation of other charters and STEM charters in the area, a concern that it was not a strong STEM approach, and the co-location with a private school, which seemed like a conversion. The one issue that I read about in the minutes was the conversion issue, and that satisfied at least my questions about that. All the other questions, I didn't see any conversation about, so if I missed those in the minutes, I'd appreciate it, because otherwise it didn't appear that any of those concerns were addressed, and so I'd have all those same concerns. It also seemed to me the vote was the same, because 3 of your folks who had voted previously weren't in attendance, so it didn't seem like the Charter School Advisory Board had moved from where they were in kind of a split approval. But especially on the academic and instructional plan and the strength of that, which given the population Clara Science is seeking to serve, and the saturation and the effort and the competitive dynamic there, would be important for me to know that there was confidence that this was a strong plan.
Yeah, I think there was a discussion primarily about digging further into the questions that were surfaced during the initial interview about the potential of a conversion and everything related to that situation. They spoke about that and let us know that they were going to move the site to a different location and had confirmed that. I do think that in general, the we didn't do another kind of deep analysis of the education plan in the discussion. And so, if I remember correctly, I think there may have been someone that was, well, I know that there were 3 of the people that voted against it were not there. And I think there might have been someone that changed their vote. I can't quite remember.
So if I, just to my fellow board members, I'd say my concern here is, and why I don't think I can support it, is I think Clara Science is looking to serve a population that looks fairly similar to one that you may remember, to a charter school that I serve on the board of directors here in Raleigh. I think that the strength of this instructional plan is so critical, especially if there's a STEM focus and it's gonna, with a goal of having more students focused into those areas and careers and strong backgrounds. I haven't seen it in the plan. I didn't see the board respond to those questions in the plan. And together with the saturation in that area and with, I think, a difficulty or setting them up for some failure in that area, this just doesn't feel like we're adding high-quality seats into the mix for a population that I understand why they're trying to serve, but I have not been convinced of the strength of the plan.
Further comments from colleagues? Let's move on to Telrot Institute in Mecklenburg County. Board members, I'll bring to your attention that we had some additional information provided to us through email, I do believe. Everybody get that? Yes? Okay. Telrot, anybody have questions about Telrot?
Can you confirm for us what the new information on the table is? I think it's about transportation plan
Yeah.
and some free and reduced price lunch. I just want to make sure I
Sure.
understood it.
Let me see if I can put my hands on it.
And Mr. Quigley.
I can share.
Mr. Quigley, thank you.
One of the points I do, and there were questions about transportation. They're applying for the Access Grant. They're going to do transportation. They're going to participate in the National School Free Lunch Program. They are going to also do a weighted lottery. So I know there were some questions about the location of the school, but I will say from my assessment of the board, I felt as in having talked to a lot of these boards, in my judgment, I felt that the board was sincere in their desire to open gifted education, and I think they'll need some support, open gifted education to students from potentially a more diverse background than are currently often served. There are tests and screening that happens even in traditional public school districts where gifted education is available, but it is not available and it's not equitable and is not accessible to all people. And I recognize the location. I feel much better now that the transportation is going to be there. I think the Office of Charter Schools will need to support these individuals in ensuring that they're actively recruiting students in areas that are in a diverse locations across CMS. And so I think if they're to actually live out the plan that they've written, it is going to take a little bit of extra, or a lot of bit of extra effort on their part to really make sure that the school has the diversity while still providing and frankly meeting one of the legislative purposes, which is to provide gifted education. So, I know the Office of Charter Schools has talked with them about that. And I will say, the gentleman who's the board chair is exceptionally bright, and the board overall is
Probably
very,
gifted.
very strong. I think maybe a PhD in BA from MIT, and then worked at McKinsey for a really long time. He's definitely a smart guy. So. They won't have any type of screening, which is for their program. So, again, I feel I also, as I voted for it and it was a unanimous vote, but I also I was concerned when I heard about the location of the school. I think, them receiving your questions indicates that, we're watching, we're excited, but we want to see you actually deliver on what you said you're going to do, which is provide a unique and an option that doesn't exist at the scale that it should, particularly for students from low-income backgrounds.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. City Charter Academy in Guilford County. Oak Grove Charter Academy in Durham County. Okay. Mr. Machado, Mr. Quigley, thank you for spending your time with us and being available to answer questions. Board members, I encourage you to do further review on the information that's posted on eBoard tonight, and feel free to ask any questions tomorrow before we vote. EICS 4 is a report to the General Assembly on our Career and College Promise and Cooperative Innovative High Schools, and that is Ms. Sneha Shah Coltrane.
Isaac.
Sneha is, okay, Sneha
I'm
is
sorry,
at a
no,
conference.
Mr. Isaac Lake.
The family Von Trapp.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure
Sorry.
to stand in for Sneha Shah Coltrane. And really just here to answer any questions we presented on this report back in February. There was an update to some of the data, but it's minimal. There are, in fact, currently 130 cooperative innovative high schools in North Carolina, not 131. And I take responsibility for that error in the report. Stanley STEM Early College and Halifax Early College were approved by this board last year and then by the State Board of Community Colleges, but because there was not a state budget, they have not been approved to operate as cooperative innovative high schools. That is also the case for the new Gaston Early College of Medical Sciences, which was approved by this board last fall.
We have 3 that have been approved by both boards.
That is correct.
Do not have funding.
That is correct, and in addition, 5 that were previously approved by the board and by the General Assembly were considered by the General Assembly to be for the supplemental funding allocation, but again, because the board did not pass, because the budget did not pass, that allocation has not been made. So those 5 schools are open and operating as cooperative innovative high schools, but without supplemental funding. I should add that Halifax Early College and Stanley Early College are open, but not operating as cooperative innovative. For supplemental funding? So for tier 1 schools, it's 275. For tier 2, it's 200,000, and for tier 3, 180. Halifax is a tier 1. Stanley's a tier 2. Gaston, tier 2.
Yeah, it's significant funding with the prospect or the potential of not having a state budget. I mean, this is innovation. This is getting our kids across the finish line. This is everything in every one of our educational institutes' goals. It might be worth thinking about where there are resources we can help deliver to support these systems to do what they have done the hard work to do and put solid plans. And I don't know where we have WIOA money. I'm looking at the governor's office here where we have some other funds that we might be able to do, but it feels like we're kind of letting folks atrophy on the vine here, or whatever the saying is, when they have put together really strong plans. So I'm venting, but I'm not venting at you. I'm just wondering, between the board and the department, if there are some creative opportunities, whether it's federal funding or ARC money. I'm not sure any of those qualify for that, but we could have an option to do something. But I'm speaking off the cuff here.
And just, if you don't mind me chipping in there, I do know that the superintendents in almost all of those counties, not the 8th county, Gaston, but in the other 7, had signed a letter several months ago requesting consideration for a mini budget, just to try to make sure that this particular funding priority, which was already in the budget and had been agreed upon by all parties, but just kind of got lost in the process. So I'm so glad we're trying to think outside the box for that. I do think it's also worth noting that a majority of those are tier 1 and tier 2 counties. So.
Yes. Thank you, and thank you for being willing to come for us. Okay, so we have 2 items for discussion.
One is EICS 5, and that is Hertford County's request to rescind its restart application.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Hall.
the record reflect that I recused myself from the discussion concerning that particular item.
So noted.
Hi, Dr. Martin.
Hello.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, board members and advisors. So we received a memo from Hertford County to rescind 3 schools from the Restart program, Ahoskie Elementary, Hertford Middle, and Riverview Elementary. Just to give you a little background information, the original request or application was submitted in 2018. In 2019, they came back. They asked for an extension because of an opportunity culture grant. They wanted to implement that as a part of their plan. The letter and information that we received contained ample evidence that they have made gains. In addition to that, they've also started to take advantage of statewide systems of support. For example, MTSS, Advanced Teacher Roles, and just the standard alignment process. Just as a mechanism, since this is my 2nd month in front of you, we have involved the regional case manager and the regional support team. Dr. Catherine Stickney, she has echoed this request. So her work with them supports this request. And just to note, Hertford Middle School is no longer low performing, so.
Excellent. We always love to hear when a school is
They
making
still meet the
growth.
definition for recurring, but they, the last data point, they are not considered on the low performing list.
Questions about this particular request to rescind that restart application? This is a discussion item, and so it'll be before us for action next month. EICS 6 is Granville County's restart application submission.
So as we subtract, we also add. We have 4 schools before you that with a restart application, all from Granville County. Butler STEM Middle, Creedmoor Elementary, Northern Granville Middle, and West Oxford Elementary. These applications have been reviewed and they meet all of our guidelines and standards. I must say that for every goal that they proposed, they talked about using a flexibility to help them meet that goal. So I was impressed with the application submitted.
Excellent. Any questions about this particular application? Hearing none, that'll be back before us for action next month.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we do have 2 consent items, but before we get to those, we have Dr. James Ellerby, our superintendent for our innovative school district, to
Thank
come
you,
and
ma'am.
give us a report. Wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you, Ms. White. Good afternoon, Chairman Davis and members of the State Board of Education. I am Dr. James Ellerby, and I'm here to give you an update on the alternative learning programs in schools that the agency is starting to do some work in order to provide support, and as well as an update on the innovative school district. First, I always like to start off with the mission and the vision and the strategic plan from the State Board, because this is where our conversations always begin, and we definitely focus on a sound basic education for all students. With the alternative learning programs in school, with our initial there of ALPS, currently I have been visiting all kind of schools across the state of North Carolina between the ISD and as well as the alternative learning programs in schools, and been able to find a lot of information. And I also want to thank our partners here in the agency, Dr. Moulinex and Robert Trumbo, some partners like SERVE, as well as RTI. We've all been coming together and had small group meetings about alternative learning programs in schools. And we had our official large meeting on yesterday, which was a very productive meeting in ways that we as an agency can support. The second bullet actually deals with the North Carolina Association for Alternative Educators. That conference will be held on March the 13th, and that will be at the Doubletree by Hilton in Durham. And this is an annual meeting where they bring alternative educators together in order to network and to talk about best practices that they're seeing across the state. And we're wanting to partner with them as the agency so that all of our supports are aligned. We also are scheduling our own agency conference, which will be on July the 28th and the 29th. And of course, more information will follow soon on how, where that's going to be located. And of course, we do have an agenda and a focal point that we have for that conference, but more information will come soon. And the fourth bullet deals with the data report that will actually come on tomorrow with a team of us from the DPI that we will be presenting that report. From the visits that we've had of alternative learning programs in schools, there's some key points that have come out. For one, placements. There's been 4 different tracks that we've been finding. First, the track has been considered with safety, and that's dealing with the long-term suspensions and the expulsions, where they feel like the student is a threat to themselves and other students, and so they're removing them from the environment. The second one is the short-term suspension, which it could be up to 45 days, where a student has some kind of violation and they're needing some therapeutic experiences and services in order to be able to transition back into the regular setting. The third is the voluntary, where a parent or students have said that they're being more successful in this low teacher-student ratio type classroom or setting and would like to stay in that alternative setting. And the last one is the innovation, where they're actually finding or partner with church-based or community-based folks, and as well as the community colleges, in finding the students' interest and building their academic program according to their interests, talents, and strengths. Districts are also asking for support, and for us to look at it from the agency standpoint, support with transportation, as well as procedures and policies, admissions rubrics, because there's an inconsistency across the state with that, and inconsistencies of how you transition in and transition out. Some districts have been concerned that it's been a dumping ground and that the best teachers have not been in those programs. So they, of course, want us to establish some things to hold districts and schools accountable for making sure they at least follow the law and the expectations of the program. You see the different types of models that we're considering in order to build the capacity of students in their metacognitive skills and abilities to be able to deduct and to reason and to de-escalate themselves in situations. A lot of times they need self-awareness and as well as self-reflection in order to be able to build their capacity. And then, of course, there are staffing issues where not only is the teacher not highly qualified or does not have a great evaluation, but sometimes there's a mindset that these students are failures and that they're a failure themselves. And so there's work that needs to be done in producing a mindset that you can be successful in this program, and as well as the students. And then, of course, the high-end flexibility, being able to partner with communities, with engineers and different other stakeholders that can also provide some support, some similar to what you get on the Restart. The next slide shows some the visits that's been made this past month, and from those visits, there are conversation. These are the patterns and the trends that have been consistent in all of those visits, such as the building of leadership capacity and especially the component of coaching. A lot of these schools are providing their principals with coaches in order to have a thought partner as they progress in their plans. The established better procedures, I heard Ms. White talking about processes, procedures. These are things that are trying to be established in order to build sustainability. And one example was a stay put policy that one county put into place because they found that their teachers were being trained and built up and received an incentive, but yet they would jump ship just as soon as someone else allowed them opportunity to go other places. So they put policies in place in order for them to maintain their incentives. Create these increased community engagement is a focal point that they're asking for support in. Also, they're asking for support, and many districts have already started reorganizing and reallocating their budgets to actually hire instructional coaches as well to go and support their initiatives. They're using things such as NC check-ins, Success Maker, and iStation, and other methods to gauge whether or not there's been success. And the last two bullets actually deal with hiring and budgets, which brings me to the thought that many of them have had conversation about the Restart model, and I think that was a really good conversation about how Restart can have an impact on these two strategies that many of them want to employ.
Dr. Ellerby,
Yes, ma'am.
let me pause right there and just remind board members that Dr. Ellerby is just not out there visiting schools because he thinks it would be fun. This is a critical part of our assessment and the process that we put in place as we work to develop schools that might be identified for further engagement, further opportunities for improvement through our 8 regional support models, but also as we work toward identifying those schools that will become a part of our innovative school district. That is coming. I don't want you to lose sight of that. For many months, it's all we talked about, and we haven't. That is coming. And so thank you for your work. I know it takes you away from your desk and away from the work that you do here. So thank you for you and your team as you go to those schools to really help educate them on what supports they have from DPI that can help them impact student performance.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
thank you. Okay, now on to the ISD.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you. The report now that I wanted to give is on the school that's in the ISD, Southside Ashpole Elementary School. And this is Dr. Oxendine's favorite slide here. As you can see, we did have to hire a teacher, but we are still at full capacity with our staff. And as well as there's 218 students now, where generally we're running 215 to 216. The teacher or staff attendance for January through February the 5th has been at 94.1%. And of course, the student attendance rate has been at 92%. I will have my next quarterly visit to Southside Ashpole on March the 20th, so I will be able to give you more information about NC check-in data and all those other data points. And my final slide actually deals with what I think the school is doing great. They're doing a lot of things with community engagement and involving the staff and students and many different activities, and all of them outlined for February 1st all the way to March 2nd there for you on the table. Any questions?
I have a quick question.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, and you're right, that is one of my favorite frames. As a matter of fact, I read to the students this past week, 4th grade students, as part of Read Across America, and enjoyed it. But going back to the student and the teacher attendance, what does that represent? Is that stable? Is it an increase, decrease, or?
It is pretty much consistent with what they've been doing all year, just a little bit lower, but they're along the same lines. And last year, I'm sorry, but I don't have data to kind of compare where we were last year with that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Dr. Ellerby.
Thank you.
We have 2 consent items tomorrow. EICS 7 is Nash Rocky Mounts request to rescind its Restart application, and EICS 8 is Guilford County's actual application submission. And Mr. Chair, that concludes our report.
Thank you, Ms. White. Team, we're now down to our last committee of the day, and I'll turn to Dr. Oxendine, Chair of the Educator Standards and Practice Committee.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, Chair of Educator Standards and Practices, and joining me in the leadership responsibility is Miss Amy White. 5 items, 4 items, 1 item, 5 is a consent item. I will begin with ES&P 1, which is the Teacher Compensation and Advanced Teaching Roles Pilot Program. This is pertaining to an RFP that is already in the hands of our LEAs. Dr. Tomberlin is coming forward to talk with us about this item, and also we're going to be updating or revising a deadline, a submission, proposal submission deadline date. So, Dr. Tomberlin?
I texted him, I think he thought we were behind and there was gonna be a break, so I've got him en route.
Okay. Then we'll go on to the next item, and I think that probably is also the state of ES&P 2 is a action item. And this is the State of the Teaching Profession Report, which was presented to us last month. It is a very, it's a great report, and it gives us a kind of it keeps the health of the teaching profession in North Carolina on our radar screen in terms of mobility, attrition, and various ways that we look upon that data and certainly can make decisions about I'm just chiming right in, Dr. Tomberlin. I'm feeling like I'm part of your team downstairs. So I'm going to go in reverse, and we will go back to ES&P 1, which is the Teacher Compensation Advanced Teaching Roles Pilot Program.
Good afternoon.
We were on a roll and didn't stop for a break.
That sounds great. So, so this item, we are bringing to you for approval the RFP for the Teacher Compensation and Advanced Teaching Roles Pilot Program. One of the mini budgets that was passed recently allowed us to select more schools for this pilot, and the contents of the RFP are exactly the same as you've approved twice before. What we want to make sure you're aware of are the deadlines for LEAs to submit their proposals, and that is April 15th. They have to be into DPI, and they have to be back to. We will report on the award winners by June 15th, and so that means we would have to come back with recommendations to you in the June board meeting. And so we wanted to make sure that fit with your timeline and that you felt like that was an acceptable time frame, which mirrors the time frame. It's a different month, but the same span for the previous RFP process.
All right, very good. Any questions from my colleagues or comments? And I believe in our pre-meeting conference call, you indicated that some systems are already submitting their proposals?
Yes. We went ahead and released the RFP since it was not changed and let districts know that it was coming about. I would like to inform the board that there's going to be a bit of a wrinkle in this one. Before we had tiers of awards, so school systems with ADMs of less than 4,000, school systems with ADM less than, I think, 7 maybe, and then larger districts with ADMs greater than 10,000. And there was a certain number that could be allotted in each of those tiers. None of that is in play for this, so we have basically $1 million to distribute, and we have to think very strategically about how that's going to be divided, because we will have applicants that can use all $1 million, and we will have applicants that maybe use 100,000 or 200,000.
And Dr. Tomberlin, is there an effort to look at spreading the grant across in a balanced way across the state?
So we can bring all that type of information to you when we bring you the proposals. We can let you know by region how many awards have been or grants have been awarded by region, by size, and then we'll do our ranking irrespective of the money. But then when we come to you, we're going to have to say, this is our highest ranked one, and it's asking, this is our highest rate proposal, it's asking for $1 million. And then then there's two underneath it that may be asking for $250,000, and you're going to have to decide, how do we want to have more pilots or one pilot, award it to the best one regardless of how much money they request. So it's going to be a challenge, and we will try to give you as much information as we possibly can to help you make the best decision.
Right, and because we believe in this model so much that I think it will be important that we have geographic representation, because I can already sense down the road we will have all kind of opportunities to use these teachers once they are proficient. And
we might find a use for them very
think
soon.
we may have a place on an item on our agenda. So making sure that our LEAs are very familiar with the model and the potential and the advanced teaching roles. It's going to be very important. Thank you very much, and you can just,
I'll just stay
you don't
here.
have to move very far.
Okay.
We'll go on to ES&P 2. I had begun talking about this about a minute before you arrived, Dr. Tomberlin. So this came to us as a discussion item last month. If you have some additional updates to this item, Dr. Tomberlin, State of the Teaching Profession Report, which is one of my favorite reports that comes to us annually.
Thank you. We enjoy doing it. So the only thing that I have to report to you are so at the last board meeting, it was requested that we include some information about equity, the diversification of the teaching force and how it relates to our student populations. So I have two quick slides to show you that we've included into the report. And the first one is to give some context to board members and the legislature around what does the diversity of our student population look like, and then what is how well or poorly does the teaching population reflect that student diversity. And as you can see here, so white is overrepresented in our teaching force relative to the student population. And when we look at African American, a little more than half of the representation in the student population among our teachers. The one that really jumps out at me is the Hispanic Latinx population relative to the student population. We have about 7 times more Hispanic students than we have Hispanic teachers. And so, I want to be very clear about this, that this is not about can a white teacher successfully teach a minority student. It's more about giving students representation. They see themselves in the teaching profession, and they see themselves as potential teachers or learners. And so we really hope that the goal here is to make our teaching force much more representative of our student population. Now, to that fact, we look at the big question then in this report is, do we see that any of these populations of teachers, these demographic populations of teachers, leave the teaching profession in North Carolina at greater rates than we expect on average? So what you have here is the attrition rate for each of these groups. And you can see the dot represents the actual rate of departure, but of course, of attrition. But of course, we have to think about this as what would we expect? And so that's what those bars are. That's what we call the confidence interval. And where that bar stretches, if it crosses that horizontal black line, that's the average attrition rate of a teacher in North Carolina. Then we would say there's really not that much of a difference. So where this is very important is if you look at Pacific Islander, it's well above the average. but the population's so small that they have such a wide confidence interval that that's still within the expected range of attrition. We wouldn't say that they're different. But if you look at American Indian, Alaskan, Native, they're far below. The top of that confidence interval doesn't touch the line. So the inference there is our Native American teaching population leaves the teaching profession in North Carolina at a much lower rate than average. So we're not losing them at disproportional rates. As a matter of fact, they're more resilient to leaving the profession than any of our other subcategories. If you then look at Asian and Hispanics, because the bottom doesn't touch that line, we would say that there is a statistically significant difference between their attrition rate. It is higher than average. So not only are we not recruiting them, we are losing Hispanic teachers at a greater rate than we are any other subgroup. Well, not any other subgroup. Asians also experience this. And they are probably the two of the lowest incoming subgroups that we have in our pipeline. And so this is a really important thing to think about and consider, because in most cases, what I've presented to you is the back end of the pipeline is okay, that we're not losing teachers at rates that should be alarming. But when we disaggregate it by race, you can see that there are some subgroups that we need to pay careful attention to and that are leaving at disproportionately higher rates.
Mr. Ford has a question.
And really more of a commentary or a point of clarification. So thank you for doing this, number one, first and foremost, incredibly important. But also germane to those two racial and ethnic subgroups. When we talk about Latinx and Asian American students, or that group as population, not only does it appear that they have higher attrition rates, but aren't those also the fastest growing subgroups in the state as well?
Yes.
So we're talking about two contrasting trends here. Not only are we losing them at a higher rate, but then also on the back end of that, those are the fastest growing groups in the state. So that gap is only widening, is what we could assume, correct?
That is correct. And that's all the new information that's in that report. Everything else is the same as what was presented to you last month.
At some point, I think it would be of interest to the board members knowing the data is very important, but figuring out going underneath and beginning to ask other questions might be something of merit down the road.
So to that point, I will reiterate something that I say to the board every time I bring this report. The reasons, this qualitative understanding of what's going on, we're relying on some reporting from the LEAs as to the reason codes, and that information is filtered through the LEA to the state. And it might be advantageous if we want to get to some of these root causes for why certain groups are leaving, if the state conducted the exit survey as part of, as much as I don't know how we would enforce it with people who are leaving the profession, but getting that information directly from those that are leaving might be more advantageous, because what we find in the data is we have to change reason codes that we get because of what we're seeing in the employment data. So a teacher may say to their district, I'm leaving and moving to another state, and that's how the LEA reports it, but the teacher actually shows up 2 counties over, and we feel like it's a question of burning bridges with employers. People are not being as forthright as they would be because they're afraid of offending or whatever the reasons may be, and having access to that information where the teacher feels confident that that's confidential and anonymous, but we would help us in our efforts to curb certain types of attrition from our schools. Could be beneficial.
I hope that we will pursue that. And another piece of data that's in this report, and I believe it's new, Dr. Tomberlin, is the vacancies on day 1 of the school year.
Yes, ma'am.
And also, I think we look at vacancies on the 40th day, which is the second end of the second month. That's important.
Yes.
We might want to even add another time point there, perhaps maybe something to think about. I'm not requesting it from the
Sure.
table.
And
but
we're
something
open to that. Just to let you know, the 40th day is what's prescribed in the statute, but we felt like first day helped provide context for that. And in this case, it really does, as you can see that the rate is much higher on the first day, and it's diminishing by the 40th day. So I think it is important to recognize that vacancy is not a first day of school problem that resolves itself by the 40th day. It's an ongoing issue for all of our LEAs.
And if we pay attention to it, maybe at another time during the year, it could give us some insight, at least some information on shortages and the persistence of vacancies and how that impacts, or if that is saying something to us about the impact of a shortage.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Then we'll move on to ES&P 3, recommendations for teachers with the North Carolina final exams. We spent considerable time last month talking about this item. We spent additional time talking about this item on our pre-meeting conference call a week ago, and a little bit of follow-up since then on another conference call. And what we have before us today is a recommendation. Last month, if you recall, Dr. Tomberlin presented 5 options, and he was requested to come back to us today with a recommendation. And because of the final exams become extinct, I think, the middle of the month. Is that not correct?
They end at the end of this school year.
I'm sorry, end of the school year. Oh, wow, we don't want that across the state. So, Dr. Tomberlin, if you would just begin the presentation.
So a couple of things in this. I'm just going to try to hit the things that are new to this recommendation. And first, I feel like it was important to set the context of what the elimination of the North Carolina final exams means for our schools. And currently, 16,892 teachers receive some growth information from the North Carolina final exams, and 12,000 of those receive student growth measures exclusively from the North Carolina final exams. So if you think about math teachers, one of their math courses might be covered by the EOC, but the other ones would be covered by the North Carolina final exams. That 12,000 means that they will get no growth information once the North Carolina final exams go away. And just so we're all aware of what we're talking about, these are all core subjects. That means they're either in reading, mathematics, social studies, or science. And those are currently the content areas that we measure with the North Carolina final exams. Last time I gave 5 possible ways to kind of compensate for the loss of the North Carolina final exams with the pros and cons of each. And when the recommendation was to come back with the one best recommendation I have for measuring effectiveness of teachers, I decided to do this the best way you can possibly do it is to have a multi-measure approach. One of the things some of the over-reliance on EVOS to tell us about effectiveness of teachers is generated by the fact that it is an objective measure. There's no bias in that measure in terms of somebody's feelings about something or somebody's values playing a role in that evaluation. And so if the idea is that you want to, if you want to measure how effective a teacher is, that you really, and within that system is a fair amount of subjectivity, the best way to guard against the subjectivity or bias in that subjective evaluation system is to have multiple lenses by which you view that event, that thing you want to measure. And so to that end, what we would propose is kind of parsing out effectiveness into some pretty big categories, 3 big categories. And one is professional practice of teachers. And we would recommend that be measured through a teacher's demonstration of leadership, both in the classroom, in the school, and for the profession at large. And then 5, the reflective practices of those teachers. How well are they using data and information and feedback to improve their practice and continually improve their process? And that's what's listed under bucket number 1. And we would say that a principal would be the appropriate observer of that professional practice and provide that feedback. Then you move to instructional practice. And here is actually what's going on in the classroom in the presence of children day in and day out. So those 3 practices would be covered by standards 2, 3, and 4. Standard 2 is creating an environment conducive to learning, or respectful environment for students. 3 is teachers know the content they teach, and 4 is teachers facilitate learning for their students. And what we would recommend here, and this is where the tie-in that Dr. Oxendine foreshadowed earlier, is that you have expert master teachers connected with teachers, providing them with content-specific and pedagogical feedback on their practice. The benefit of this is those teachers would be working with those classroom teachers. These master teachers would be working with the classroom teachers day in, day out in the presence of students and their learning. And then finally, and then second to that, we would incorporate student perceptions of their teachers' instructional practice. How are the students experiencing the instruction they're receiving? Just to clarify some of the things that you would ask in that regard, or when I don't understand something, my teacher takes time to explain it to me. My teacher covers things that teaches me things in different ways, or will teach a concept in multiple ways. Those are the kinds of things you would want for your students, that incorporated into that instructional practice. And then finally, no system would be as robust as it could be if you did not have some objective measure of student outcomes. And so that could be achieved by EVOS. It could be achieved through a performance-based assessments. It could be achieved through that the formative assessment system that we talked about, that we recommended in one of the 5 proposals. There are many ways to skin that, but it would be trying to find the right word. Any model we developed that didn't focus on student outcomes would ultimately be deficient in trying to understand the effectiveness of our teachers. So, I do want to make a disclaimer that, and I just made that disclaimer basically. This system that I just articulated would take a lot of time to implement. The board has to make a proposal that could replace that information that's being lost from the NCFEs in the 2021 school year. The best solution to this problem would be to maintain the North Carolina final exams and our ability to measure teacher effectiveness until such time as we could create a more robust model of measuring the effectiveness of our teachers. I'm not sure how the board feels about that recommendation, but what is being asked is really not possible. And under these kinds of time frames, and this is the best I can offer you as a recommendation. And I apologize for one other thing. I realized I've split my infinitive in this slide, so I will correct that before we send it over to the.
I wasn't going to say anything, Tom.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tomberlin. Do I have any questions or comments from my colleagues? Mr. Ford.
So I'm gonna spend a little bit of time cheerleading here, and then I promise I will end with the question. I'm gonna hook this train up, so just stay with me, okay? First, we just want to impress upon again the importance of incorporating student perception as part of teacher effectiveness. And I know we've had conversations ad nauseum about whether there's a correlation, how strong it is, and as you talked about in the past, many of the tools that have been used for student evaluations and student surveys, North Carolina has been the testing ground for the validation of some of these tools. And so, I think there's a good amount of evidence to support that they do correlate with teacher effectiveness. But in addition, as we talk about, going to be beating the drum here, enacting equity, so many different ways that this is important, not only in mapping culturally responsive practices into the questions, right, as some of the examples that you gave, right, teaching from multiple perspectives, seeing myself in the curriculum, you know, it can be anywhere from the aesthetics of the classroom to the grouping, right, all those things, but finding a way to work those things into the questionnaire is important. But then also the disaggregation by race, ethnicity, class, and gender in the responses, I just want to say moving forward is a tremendous tool for planning and building into our systems the sort of change that we want to see and that we communicated into our strategic plan. So that's my cheerleading portion. The question is, you're going to be spitballing here. So how long would it take? If we can't do it within a proposed time frame, you said we just don't have the time, in your estimation, how long would it take to create a system that does do that I desire? I'll speak for myself here.
So let me clarify that statement that I made. So the model that I proposed, the model
Yeah.
would take a number of years to implement, because I mean, I think
Teens number, what you thinking like? Look,
well, I think that depends on how fast we could move the teacher compensation and advanced teaching roles pilots to a statewide initiative. So that would need to be up and running. You'd have to find way. We know that there's going to be capacity issues in certain districts. They just won't have any master teachers. So you would have to build consortia to leverage, you know, the one effective teacher here, assisting with and trading off highly effective teachers. That could take 5 years. I also would be remiss if I didn't say it's incredibly expensive. It's we have a
we
great
have money in
model.
North Carolina. We have tons of money in
That's
North
right.
Carolina.
Okay. So I won't worry about cost. So it now of the the recommendations for things like the formative assessment piece, if we wanted to do something different, kind of assessment wise, that would probably follow along with the current 5-year plan we have for those NC check-ins. What is the actual? What are we calling the through assessment system? The innovative assessment system. Thank you. That would have to probably follow along that same timeline if we wanted to get that up and running. Same thing with computer adaptive test. Really, the only thing that we could implement in the 2021 school year reasonably would be a student survey. But I don't think.
Can we investigate that deeper, Madam Chair?
As a matter of fact, we probably will be investigating that, all components of the recommendation, and it contains 3 components. We will be investigating the decision. Here's what we have talked about in terms of the report to the JLEOC, is to present, and we will vote on this tomorrow, is to present this recommendation, to approve the report that will go over to the JLEOC, and within that report will be this recommendation. But also that Dr. Tomberlin lay out to the General Assembly members the very things that we have talked about today, the challenges, the money factor, the intense, I just can't imagine, the labor intensity to just the component of bringing together master teachers to observe and evaluate every teacher in a school every year, because we're not talking about a sample size. We're talking about every teacher in a school every year. And I'm thinking about the school systems that are hard to staff with, they don't have the same equal number of master teachers. It would be over-reliance on, let's say, the same core 5, 6, 7 teachers in a given school going in classrooms for over a long period of time, observing and evaluating it. And think of the training that would be necessary around that particular item itself in terms of removing bias. So it's mammoth work. It's worthy work. And I think everyone around the table would agree to that. It's worth our investigation and our research and our best effort. But it would take I don't know where I will be in 5 years, but find me.
So,
Yes,
if I
question.
could oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
A question to my left.
So, and I could not agree more with my friend James Ford down at the end of the table. Student perceptions are critical data sources that we need to drive school improvement in North Carolina. We're administering the Teacher Working Condition Survey this month in North Carolina. We do that every 2 years. Very valuable data source, but that student learning condition survey piece is really critical. And in our own district, as we've driven, or we've test driven Panorama survey data here in Edgecombe, that has provided incredibly insightful data points from the perspective of students who are our primary stakeholder. I do have reservations about implementing that as a part of a teacher effectiveness model before we've been able to implement that as part of a school improvement model. However, that said, I think it's really critical that your last slide, that we just dwell upon that for a moment, because when Tom Tomberlin reports to us, no, the last slide, the actual one you have.
Split infinitive?
Yes, the split infinitive slide. When you say to us the best solution would be to reinstate the NCFEs, I think many of us have known since the initial legislation was passed that there was probably going to be no solution that was as effective in measuring the quality of teaching as the NCFEs that generate EVOS data. We see that with end-of-course tests. We see that with our North Carolina final exams. My guess is that the master teachers that you'd be identifying to be mentor teachers would be folks that we used EVOS data to identify that they were master teachers, right? I mean, I think that's important to note. I also think it's really important to note that the reason that law was passed was because there was an anti-testing wave in North Carolina, and that anti-testing wave was kind of sweeping across social media, it was sweeping across schools. And if you ask any school in North Carolina, what are students going to do at the very end of their Math 2 class or of their American History class, they're going to tell you that they're going to take a summative, cumulative exam. Whether it's administered by the state of North Carolina or it's administered by the teacher, they're going to take an exam. It is written into local board policy in my county that we do that.
Yep.
So we are not actually reducing testing, we are changing the way that we test. And my deep concern is that what we lose by taking the EVOS data off the table for our North Carolina final exam classes is we lose, and these are your words, objective, non-biased data about which kids are learning and to what extent they're learning, and we lose growth data. And growth data is so essential. And I want growth data that I can drill down and I can look at by subgroup. I want growth data I can look at by teacher, and we don't have that data if we get rid of the NCFEs. Even with this new model that we're discussing, we don't have that kind of growth data. So I would just, you know, as a newcomer to the table, I very often start down a road, and at the end of that road is a law. I've already been down that road today with the question about bonuses for the APIB stuff. And it just feels to me so incumbent that we do communicate to our friends at the General Assembly that this law does not have a better solution than the current process that we were using prior to the passage of that law. In other words, the best solution would be to reinstate the NCFEs. That should be the title of this report.
Dr. Austin?
Yes, Mr. Buxton.
I appreciate those comments very much. I think this effort and the folks who supported it was kind of the reverse of our state motto. It was to seem rather than to be. We haven't done anything different because everyone's going to take these same exams.
Yes, sir.
But I don't believe under our Constitution, our coming Leandro conversation, we have the ability to not have some kind of assessment of the things that are in the Leandro right, which include a lot of the things that the final exams cover. So we have no assessment in a number of specific disciplines that our own Constitution calls out. And so I don't see any wiggle room for us to have some assessment of student knowledge of certain content areas that, again, are called out in the Constitution. So we could say this, but we've got to do something to, whether it's not going to be called the North Carolina final exam, that's for sure, because law tells us we're not going to have North Carolina final exams. But we're going to have some kind of assessment of student learning to be able to stipulate our delivery of a constitutionally adequate education. So I think my point here is we have to develop, this department and this board have to develop something which covers that. My question would be, I assume this proposal is not just to cover what used to be North Carolina final exams, but would be for any teacher, because we wouldn't want a teacher who teaches biology to just have the state assessment and then the teacher who is also teaching something else or another science course, they have observational data, student survey data, and this assessment data. I would assume we would have kind of one vision of what an effectiveness system looks like for teachers. So I'm taking the spirit of this as this is what you think effectiveness with multiple measures ought to look like for any teacher in North Carolina.
That's
And
correct.
the elimination of the final exams gives us the opportunity to start moving down this road. My comment, I guess, to my board members would be, I think we have to have something in the short term that begins to build in some assessment of content knowledge. And in areas called out by the Constitution, and as we're building towards a larger system of teacher effectiveness that looks like what I think you've developed. I don't know the cost of student surveys statewide or the observational infrastructure, but it has to include student assessment at some level, and we just got to figure out what that is and not call it that.
Are there other questions or comments? So tomorrow, this item is going to come to the board. Again, it is that we are recommending that the department present this report to, yes, Dr. Tomberlin.
I'm sorry, I'm very fearful of running afoul of Vice Chair Duncan twice in one day, but the report is due March 15th. So we're up against a pretty hard deadline. Unless we ask for more time.
So do you have, when do you anticipate having it prepared?
Well, I mean, if the board votes to approve, this is our recommendation, I can create the report for the General Assembly before that deadline. I just thought I heard we were not voting on this today.
We are voting on, the recommendation is that the State Board of Education is approving the delivery or the submission of this report that does contain this recommendation.
Okay, so that's what, I didn't know.
So that's that doesn't say that we are, all of us thumbs up saying, go forward with this model and develop it in a 5-year period of time. What we're saying tomorrow in a vote is that we are approving that that the department submits this report that contains this recommendation to replace the North Carolina final exams, or the method for determining growth, teacher effectiveness rather. That report is presented to the JLEOC that contains this recommendation.
Yes, ma'am. I will work with my new best friend, Dr. Deanna Townsend-Smith, to make sure we get this to you in time to submit it to the JLEOC on the 15th.
Thank you.
Questions down.
What, other questions? I'm sorry.
Hi, Dr. Oxendine.
I've got to bend over further.
Yeah, let him go, now go after him.
So, Dr. Tomberlin, you know, those of us who have been around the block for over 2 decades in education have seen initiatives that have been tremendously successful, but we've seen others that have just kind of fallen flat. And the analysis of student work assessment model was one such initiative that I think started out with a clear vision for trying to provide assessment for teachers that did not have standardized assessments, and very quickly the implementation challenges and the validity challenges made that an assessment model we ultimately stopped using about 2 to 3 years after we started using it. My deep concern about our recommendation is that the best guidance from the educators in the room that are going to the JLEOC is couched in the disclaimer. In other words, that very last sentence, to me, the best solution is to reinstate the NCFEs, feels to me like that ought to be our proposal. That the other model that we're assessing, which is the best bits and pieces of the 5 options that you presented last month, is the next best solution to measuring teacher effectiveness.
I appreciate you saying that, because I don't think that's at all what I'm saying. I would say that is the best model. This is the next best we can do. And I would probably qualify that last sentence to say, until such time as we could implement a more robust model of measuring teacher effectiveness.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't want to put, I appreciate what you're saying. I think I still have reservations about a model of teacher effectiveness that for all practical purposes relies solely on a student growth
sure.
measure. And that's always been a concern to me. And the current evaluation process, we all know has some flaws in it, to the point where it is only EVOS that is telling that
Right.
story of effectiveness.
Agreed, and I couldn't agree more with that. I think that we as educators have shot ourselves in the foot by the testing frenzy by which we have approached preparing students for these final exams. It's just losing that assessment data, losing that growth data is almost irreparable when you're talking about trying to drive school improvement. So it just needs to be said that I would hate for us to, as a state, have invested so heavily in that, for us to have built systems around that, and then for us to drop those systems because an anti-testing law was passed.
Just as
Dr.
a
Emery.
suggestion, listening to your comments and the rigorous conversation that has happened in the background, the work going on with Leandro, is that if there is appetite, that the recommendation moves forward as is, but you task the department with bringing you back a timeline, a plan, a cost analysis for what this work might look like and how it would fit with what we're doing with Leandro. And I think that could be documented in the report, that that's what you ask us to do. The minutes would reflect it. So it does also plant this seed that while what we have to do is right here in front of us, and it makes sense, that we also know there's probably another way that's more equitable in looking at the effectiveness of a teacher.
I think that's a great idea. Plus, it is giving it's giving forward the message to the General Assembly that we are thinking about a solution to a very complex problem. Thank you.
Can I ask one last question? Dr. Timerman, would you have any problem with changing the last sentence to something more along the lines of the best solution would be to include a standardized assessment, or an objective standardized assessment as part of this process, as opposed to using the NCFEs kind of language? Because what you're saying, I mean, you're not hung up on whether it's a final exam so much as you've got to have an objective standard assessment of some sort. It seems like we could tailor the language to an appropriate place on that to fit the needs that are being expressed and the needs as you see and feel them.
So just so I'm clear of the direction of the board, is the preferred outcome that we have the current system of measuring teacher effectiveness with some kind of new assessment, or is it to move to this more robust multiple measure approach to measuring teacher effectiveness? Because I don't want to put words in the board's mouth. I mean, I need to understand.
What I was volunteering was we're moving towards the more robust, well-rounded assessment, but that includes, as part of that more robust assessment, an objective standardized assessment of some part. And that while you're moving in the interim, you may have to place some reliance on that until you get the other features in place. It's a transition process.
That's very helpful in clarifying.
That's just me. I don't know what other board members.
Okay, so I'm now navigating to my right and then.
Yeah, well, I think Vice Chairman Duncan covered my comments, but just to restate to see if I got it right. So I think we want to propose this more robust model. I mean, I think it's despite all the difficulties, we're up to the challenge. We want to try to make it work. That includes a standardized assessment. In the interim, while we're doing all that work, and however many years it takes, we want to retain a standardized assessment. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Well said.
Okay.
That's where we are.
Yes.
And this will give us, go ahead, I'm sorry. Mariah.
Yeah, well said, Chairman Davis. Do you mind going back to the more robust model? My only comment is very minute with the classroom practice. We were talking about how that piece is going to require a lot of time and infrastructure development and money going into creating that. And I would just suggest thinking about how we could have the instructional classroom practices assessed without using master teachers, because evaluative coaching sometimes is not the most effective. And I think embedded in that is going to be some type of coaching if you have a master teacher, and so I think that might blur the lines. We do have instructional leaders in our buildings, principals, assistant principals, instructional coaches that aren't doing master teacher cycles, but a lot of teachers are on observation cycles where they're being observed multiple times in a year, sometimes up to 3-4 times in a year. So as if we put a master teacher in that position, that's all they're going to be doing.
That's
So-
exactly right.
To respond to that, the impetus of this is the recognition of what's happening with the advanced teaching roles currently, the multi-classroom teacher, where you have a master teacher. This is a job embedded, this is the responsibility of that person to be in the classroom with these teachers day in, day out. This is not a separate and apart thing. So if you look at those models from Public Impact, a master teacher is maybe responsible for 4 classrooms with teachers, and they're co-teaching, they're working with it. And I hear your question about the coaching, but I think that evaluative coaching problem starts to diminish when that person is with you day in and day out, as opposed to coming in at certain points of the year and working with you.
Yeah, I hear you on that. My real question is if a teacher is being observed multiple times, like when I was a beginning teacher, I was being observed 3-4 times a year. Okay, so we're going to now put that onto that teacher, the master teacher. If they're going into 4 or 5 classrooms, a lot of their day is now going to be taken up with very evaluative type procedures, where right now they're not over their teacher effectiveness in this robust of a way. So I think their time is going to be taken up a lot more with that versus the instructional coaching piece. And we have principals and assistant principals who we are assuming are instructional leaders who are already doing observations. So what if we could somehow pull that in?
So, yeah, this will take time. And what I would respond to that is, we're not seeing that important feedback cycle in those critical instructional practice standards. I feel like in the evaluation system that I would imagine teachers need to help grow and improve their practice. It's certainly not evidenced in the data. Like, this is, when you look at these standards, a teacher is a 3 or a teacher is a 4, and I'm using a teacher is proficient or accomplished or distinguished, and you're seeing that across all the standards. You're not seeing differentiation in those standards. The evaluation system is not picking up relative weaknesses and strengths of an individual teacher, and that's what we're trying to address with this, is to get teachers that here's where you're really strong and here's where you could improve type feedback that we're not seeing in our current evaluation process.
Okay, other questions or comments? Very good discussion. And then we will go to the final, not the final, ESNP 4 is the educator preparation, the dashboard update, and that is going to be presented to us by Dr. Syberg.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
you, Lawrence. So I'm sensitive to the fact that we're at the tail end of the day here, so I'm going to try and be as succinct as I can and cover all this information for you. You have a PowerPoint in your materials associated with this. I'm going to be going over a couple of those things, and then I'll be sharing some online dashboard visualizations for you to sort of take a look at what's coming. Let me grab my, here it is. So the first thing I want to start with is the EPP reporting requirements. This is a standard annual process. You've seen me multiple years now since I've been employed here to provide a series of performance reports and report cards. Those are static documents. They're, in the case of the performance reports, there's a number of things that are covered, varying from narrative responses to detailed questions in law, down to the service that is provided to public schools from EPPs, to candidate characteristics, and survey results, a variety of information. So what we've done is we put all of those onto a folder that you now have access to through a URL that I think was sent out. Yes, so you have access to all of that. And then think of, for folks who are new to this process, think of the report cards as sort of a two-page snapshot of the overarching larger document that is the performance report. So the performance report has everything in the kitchen sink, and the report cards is more of a snapshot. So in thinking about sort of the next steps, I have to sort of take one step back and draw your attention back to the accountability requirements. So for the past few months, I've been coming to present to you all about the possibility of a weighted composite model for EPP accountability. We've talked about that, I think, January and February. And currently that work has been sent back to Pepsi and to consider some changes that were requested from the board in last month's meeting. Until that's complete, and there's a series of steps that are going to occur here. Once Pepsi actually finishes that work, makes a second recommendation to the board. If the board approves that, then that recommendation goes to the JLEOC, and the JLEOC then considers it for potential legislative changes. And so all those things have to happen in order for an accountability model to change to what all this work has been headed towards. Until then, House Bill 107 actually has accountability requirements embedded in it. So until these new things actually come to fruition, we have an obligation to look at these three criteria on slide 3, and to disaggregate those data with respect to race, ethnicity, and gender. And to that end, in the fall, we've come to you all to bring a variety of things to help make this process work. Some of it was converting raw scores into a 4-point level system, whereby 4 would be exemplary, 1 would be sanctionable. And we've also considered leveraging multiple years of data. And the reason for that is to get sample sizes large enough for some of the smaller institutions to take a look at programs. We've set limitations on the subgroups to a sample size of 10. And then we have a variety of criteria in place in order to satisfy these various accountability rules. It's important for everyone to know that this year is the first year we're supposed to present this information, these 3 accountability expectations and using the various rules that have been set up. But actual sanctions don't occur until 21-22, and they'll use data from 20 and 21 to consider whether sanctions should occur. So essentially what we're doing this year is to provide everybody out in the field, hey, these are the expectations, and were we to be issuing sanctions, you might be under sanction. And in the current data that we've looked at, we see that if we were issuing sanctions this year, 12 institutions of the roughly 50 or so EPPs would fall under some sort of a warning sanction, and 2 would fall under probation, which is the second of the 3 levels of sanction, given the current rules that we have set up and the expectations that are in law. So given all of that, another thing that came out of 986 was a required sharing of data of EPPs that is user-friendly to the public and also has the ability to easily compare programs. And if you want to go ahead and get yourself set up there. Essentially what they're basically saying is, can you create some sort of a dashboard so that we can look at these data and compare at whatever level of granularity that we'd like to compare to? Because since I've been employed here, we've been doing static documents, and those static documents are very hard to look at. If I want to look at how different smaller schools are comparing, or different independent schools are comparing, or how HBCs are comparing, I have to get all those individual reports out and look at them statically, which can be quite laborious. So to that end, we're working to create this EPP dashboard. And this is going to do what 986 is asking for us to do, which is to visually represent these static reports that we've built. It's going to allow for efficient comparisons. It's going to allow for ed prep programs to think about, how we can, where are the hot spots and where are the points of celebration that we can leverage for helping other programs across the state. And then ultimately that's going to inform EPP program improvement planning. In slide 6, we've provided a list of all the different EPP dashboards that are going to be coming online. We have a variety of different reports that we can look at. For this presentation, we are only going to be sharing the accountability model, because the accountability model should be coming out at the same time that the board approves the performance reports and report cards. So that's what we're trying to get done all simultaneously. And so what we thought we'd do today is share with you a quick 30,000 foot snapshot of what this thing is going to look like. And if we can, Lawrence is going to help us get this on the overhead for us. So as they're getting ready, you're going to see it in the overhead TV. Again, what we're presenting is real data, but we're not actually presenting identifiable data today. You'll see we've replaced EPPs with tree names, and it was quite a Herculean effort to come up with 50 tree names. That's not an exercise I'm used to doing, and well, it was fascinating. So, but again, this is think of this as the system that will be doing all kinds of visualizations over the next year and a half. We'll be developing these out. We had a generous grant from Bill and Melinda Gates to leverage a full FTE to work on developing this process. What you're going to see here is on the left side, you'll see an overview and then a series of information that is listed down the left side. Essentially, all of that data that you'll see there are the various reporting expectations that are in 107. So everything that 107 is asking to be measured and to be made public, we're going to have that on this dashboard very quickly. Probably in the next 2 months, many of these things will be turned online. Again, right now, we're just going to focus on the EPP accountability measures. The second thing I want to draw your attention to, this main screen right now, you're looking at the overview. Along the top of each of these reports, you'll see a series of pages, and this functions not unlike an Excel document, where you have like an Excel report and then you have individual pages within that, right? So the overview page is always going to provide very specific information. The top half is going to be where we place descriptions of what the data are being provided and how they're being displayed. So if you want to know what's being presented, your default is going to be looking at the overview first. And so here you'll see that the top half will be rolling that out, and then the bottom part would be where the data notes are, and this is you can think of this as what are the features of the data and their interpretation that you should keep in mind when you're looking at the data. So that's sort of standardized over any report that we do. And then if you think about along the top left, going from left to right, we're also trying to be mindful to set things up based on a micro to macro approach from left to right. So the smallest level of granularity that we'll provide will be the first page of anything on the left side, and then as we move further to the right, you'll see that this gets all the way out to the state level. So with that, let's take a look at the first one, which is the single EPP detail. This is the most narrow view of accountability data, and it is small to see the words here, but let me just walk you through what you're seeing. Along the left side, you'll see the 50 tree names, give or take a couple, and there you can choose any there, and that will help change what you're seeing in the center part. So if we can make sure, I wanted to look at Locust first as an example, because that's a bigger program.
Very apocalyptic.
So in the Locust program, you'll see the data shows up. So now we're looking at Locust. So let's take a look at the top here. There's a little narrative at the top that sort of lays out what this information is being provided. And in there, you'll also see there's a part that says click here if you want any help for understanding the chart. So if we look at that, there's a how-to that can walk you through. Any stakeholder can look at this and read through and understand exactly what it is that's being presented. It's been very carefully thought through. And then if you want to understand the levels, remember I mentioned earlier on an earlier slide this idea of converting raw data to levels. You can click on the level system. Essentially anything that's on the web page is basically clickable. And these are ranges that were set up in a prior meeting with the board in the fall. But again, more information to sort of lay things out. We also have color-coded the dashboard so that you can see exemplary practice level 4 programs versus accomplished and proficient all the way down to sanctionable level 1. And I think what is important for you to see here, in the center of the screen, we're looking at current data 2017 to 2019. You'll see the three measures that are required in law to be assessed, and that's teacher evaluation, student growth, and candidate satisfaction. And you'll see along the left there the overall measure, which is the first thing that's offered there. And then you'll see in any place that the EPP that shall be named Locus has a sample size greater than 10, we will disaggregate that data to any of the subcategories that are required in 107. So again, we chose Locust because it's a big program, and you can see in many of these areas we see multiple levels of subgroup opportunity to see what's going on. So in each of these areas, again, this is 3 years worth of data, and we can disag by a variety of different levels. What's important for you all to know that is in this process, if any of these areas is a level 1, and this is also why I chose Locus, you can see largely they are doing quite fine, with the exception of, and I can't see that from here, is that male? Yeah. Male students under student growth is not where it needs to be yet. That would be a sanctionable event. So what this means, and again, to illustrate this, is that larger programs have more opportunities to have a sanctionable situation because they have more subgroups that they can look at. In the hierarchy of things, when you get into very small institutions, the only opportunity that you can look at over 3 years might be at the overall level. So, but again, that's the way the law is written. So that's a little snapshot of the first opportunity to look at data at the individual institution level. The second tab we have at the top there, which is to take a look at the comparison of schools. And you'll see here we've clicked about 6 schools along the left there. It's the same process. We provide a narrative at the top to help you understand what's going on. We also provide a click here for a how-to, and everything is color-coded as we have mentioned in the past. And so here we can very quickly see 6 schools that we can look at across all 3 of the measures that are required in 107. And if you could go ahead and maybe subtract 2 of those schools off the list, it's a very intuitive and very quick system. You can click whatever comparative groups that you'd like to see, by whatever criteria you want to look at. So you don't have to go through Andrew's old static documents ad nauseum. You can actually go in here and look at whatever systems that you'd like to look at a very fast and nimble level. The next tab that you'll see is after comparisons, which was a requirement in 107, is can we look at this across an entire state? And the answer is yes, we can. Again, same setup at the top. We have a drop-down bar, and in that case, can we choose Apple as the tree of choice for this? And you'll notice if we mouse over anything in the center document, it will provide a variety of information so you can see what you're looking at. But you'll also notice when we clicked on Apple, it highlights the specific dot associated with all the EPPs that we have within the state. And you can see under the category of teacher evaluation, which is this particular presentation that you see, they are not doing as well as they need to. They are a level 1 in that area. But if we were to click on student growth and maintain that Apple designation, you'll see they show up much higher in the category 3. And then if you go to the candidate satisfaction level, they're even higher. So again, this is a snapshot for you to be able to see how is one institution faring relative to all, I say institutions, I really should say EPPs. How is one EPP faring to all of their EPP peers across the state? This will include not just programs that produce degrees, but any program that leads to licensure as well. So some of the new programs that have been coming online, like Teachers of Tomorrow, they will be on this as well when they have data. They've been around long enough that they have outcome data. The last point that I want to draw your attention to is the data tables. And out in the field, we'll go there. You're there. So the other thing you can do is you can disag by race, gender, and ethnicity on this page as well. And here you can see when we look at individual programs that have enough candidate satisfaction responses to surveys. And I'm sure Dr. Tomlin will want to jump in here at the end to mention something along this line of conversation. You'll see when you start to disaggregate, there are much smaller sample sizes. There are not 50 some odd EPPs that have sufficient data in order to look at. We have a very limited data when we start to disaggregate. And so there's some very telling ways to disaggregate the data to explore and think about policy implications going forward. The last part is data tables, and this is where we'll provide, think of it as Excel sheets. So if you're out in the field and you're an EPP and you wanted to look at data a specific way, this would be a way for you to export the data, and then you can do your own modeling, your own presentations. You can share across your stakeholders and start thinking about your program improvement going forward. So again, this is the start. I don't want you to think that this is the only one we have built. We're about 70 to 90% done with a variety of other tables. Those tables have to be vetted. They have to be, we're getting a variety of peer input and stakeholder input in the process. We've included NCICU in this discussion as well as UNCGA. So there's a lot of moving parts associated with making this happen. But our expectation is to be able to turn the lights on for you all so you have an interactive way to engage in this. Probably in the next 2 weeks, we'll send this out through Deanna's, probably the Friday update, so that you have access and you can see the actual names associated with schools. We'll also give that opportunity for deans of each EPP and program leaders of each EPP ahead of time. Ultimately, if you are ready to turn the lights on for this in April, at the same time that the performance reports and report cards are approved to go over to the JLEOC, we'll turn this on and it'll become an active public document. We'll also hang that on our website so it's easily approachable. And then periodically, as we're creating new tables and updates, we'll be sure to keep you all abreast of the different ways to look at data going forward in terms of the teacher preparation pipeline.
This is excellent work, and just seeing seeing this demonstration is just it brings it to a different level of awareness. Can we get a link to this, board members?
Yes, you're gonna get a link probably in the next 2 weeks or so. We're trying to, there's a lot of behind the scenes getting SAS to get everybody to have access here internally. So as soon as we'll have it, we'll get it to you immediately. And then if anybody has any questions, you can obviously reach out to me. I'll be happy to walk you through. But our hope is that it's easily digestible and
Well,
and
this is
somewhat
just cutting
intuitive.
edge. I'm happy to, kudos to you,
Oh.
your staff, all who took part in this. So, thank you very
One
much. Other
last-
questions, though? I don't want to skip that. Opportunity to question, comment? Okay, one other comment, Dr. Seiberg?
Yes, I wanted to mention, it's escaped me now at the moment. I did want to ask if Dr. Tomlin wanted to come up and talk a little bit about the survey
Well,
side of things.
We're kind of running out of time.
Sorry.
Kind of running out of time unless it's,
Okay, no? All right, we're out of time.
I'm getting signals from all
Sorry.
around this table. My creative partner over here. Thank you very much. The last item is a consent item, ES&P 5, and this pertains to LICN 003. It's a middle school science exam produced by the vendor, by Praxis. It's the recommendation of a new cut score and therefore a new test code. And this all becomes effective, the new cut score and test code, September 2020. The current one is valid through August 2020. So that completes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Well, this concludes today's committee meeting. We'll have 2 more committee meetings during tomorrow's board meeting. I want to thank board members, our fine DPI staff, and other contributors that participated in today's meeting. Ask for a motion to go into closed session, and note for the audience and online listeners that following closed session, this March 4th, 2020 meeting will adjourn immediately. Vice Chair Duncan.
I move that the State Board of Education go into closed session to consult with our attorneys to discuss personnel matters, attorney-client privilege matters, information that is privileged and confidential pursuant to 09 NCAC 06B.0103, confidentiality of solicitation documents, and 09 NCAC 06B.0309, evaluation, and other attorney-client privilege matters, including Hope County versus State of North Carolina and North Carolina State Board of Education, Dominski versus North Carolina State Board of Education and Pitt County Board of Education, Amplify Education, Inc. versus North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and iStation, Kinetic Minds Inspire, LLC, and Escabana Henderson versus North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, Kinetic Minds, LLC, and Denise Henderson versus North Carolina Department of Public Instruction.
Motion by Vice Chair Duncan. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Hall. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxenden?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers? Yes. Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Okay, let's be enclosed at 5:15.
Hey, baby.